Hello and welcome. We are live, right? Okay. Hi, welcome to the Pylon Show. We're on at kind of a funny day here today. Obviously, it was supposed to be on yesterday. I'm having a baby very, very soon. I don't know exactly when. We thought it was coming yesterday, but it has all slowed down. So no baby yet, but we will keep you posted on that, of course, as who knows, I might have to miss another day at GSL or something. Anyways, today we have a very special episode of the Pylon Show. It is episode 61. It's something I wanted to do for a very long time. It is an episode on maps and map makers and the map making process and all that. And if you don't know a whole lot about that, well, you can join me because I'm going to learn a lot about that today. I feel very ignorant on the subject, and it's time to fix that up, to clean that up, because that's ridiculous. I should know more about map making. All you should as well. But before we introduce these wonderful guests that we have today, I'm going to go ahead and thank our sponsors. First, let's start with afkt.com. They're fantastic. Go there, get their tea. Lycan has been supporting the show through his company for quite some time. The tea is high quality. It is tasty. It is good. Check it out, afkt.com. We also have our Matcherino page, matcherino.com/The Pylon Show. You can really support us quite a bit there. And you go ahead, you can use, albeit a little bit early, a very thoughtful gesture, Dadtosis as the contribution if you want to just give us money for free. And that won't cost you anything but signing in as you should do. Also, we have, if you want to support the Pylon Show, the absolute best way to do it is through our Patreon. It is patreon.com/The Pylon Show. And there, I mean, thank you everyone for supporting. It's amazing. This is why that we can really keep the show going. So thank you guys. And of course, you can check out thepylonshow.com. If you are a Patreon supporter, you can submit questions for the show that we will answer at the end. And of course, it has all of our VODs and everything like that. We are going to have a forum up and all sorts of great things. You can see our wonderful show notes as well, which, by the way, you can see absolutely everywhere. We're going to jump this week in StarCraft to the end of the show this week, just trying some new things and hedging some bets. And by the way, a big cheers to Alessander, who's been doing our show notes for an entire year as of yesterday. So that is a lot of hard work, and that's how we can bring you all these wonderful facts about the pizza pie bi-weekly. Okay, so that all being said, let me just give a quick little overview of what we're doing with the show here today. Again, talking about maps. We're going to skip the discussion about like GSL and ASL and things like that. Not a lot happened since last week anyways. There's been like one day and I didn't get to watch it yet. And yeah, so just tons of map stuff with these wonderful map makers. Then we'll jump into the Patreon questions and then talk about this week in StarCraft. So let's go ahead and introduce our people here. First off, we have Avex, a longtime friend of mine, wonderful map maker. Avex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the maps that you've made so that people can kind of, put some maps to your name?
Sure. So I started out pretty much like, I think Negative Zero has the same background as I do. Brood War, like many of us, was our calling. I also did a lot of map making Warcraft 2. I actually spent most of my time doing arcade kind of stuff, UMS, a lot of custom things. Took me to having my friend convince me to buy Heart of the Swarm towards the pre-order phase. I started doing some arcade stuff in StarCraft 2 as well, and then I discovered Starbow. Quickly piloted me into making serious ladder maps for StarCraft 2, and then the rest is kind of history. Most people will know me for Odyssey and Blackpink at this point. Probably my more successful maps, even though Odyssey is pretty controversial in some regards, but it's definitely a memorable map for most people. Blackpink is, K-pop group, so that has its own name to it, and it was a pretty standard, balanced map for its time. So pretty simple for me. There's nothing very special. I'm very grateful for all the friends I've made along the way, including people like Dan, everybody.
Great. All right. And then we have Maris. Maris, you are an up-and-coming map maker. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the maps that you've worked on and those accolades?
Yeah, I'm pretty new to the scene in general. I started watching in 2017, actually, and I started making maps in early 2018. And yeah, I have 2 maps in the current ladder pool, Disco Bloodbath and Winter's Gate. So we'll see how they turn out. Yeah,
Excellent.
I don't know if there's anything much more to it at this point.
Okay. Excellent. Of course, Avex recommended me you to have on the show as you're one of the up-and-coming ones. Congratulations on your 2 maps in the pool this season. Yeah, we'll be seeing those played at BlizzCon, I guess. Pretty exciting for you. All right, and then we have well, don't let his anti-gravity ID on Twitter fool you. This is -0, and of course this is a map maker who's had a lot of maps out there so far. -0, same to you. What are some of the maps that you've made, and just tell us about yourself a little bit.
All right. Well, I've been doing it since around 2013 or so, ruining pro gamers' lives. Let's see. I started out in Brood War 2, just like making maps for fun for my friends to play, and then it turned into a little more serious. And yeah, from there I switched to StarCraft 2. I made let's see, in order: Terraform, Apotheosis, Sequencer, Interloper, Catalyst, Abiogenesis, Blue Shift, Red Shift, and now in this current season, World of Sleepers and Ephemeron. And also, a lot of people won't know, I made a map a long time ago, back in I think 2013, called Overwatch, before the game actually was announced, so big coincidence there. And it took quite a few years, but as of now, that's actually been used in the KSL Brood War tournaments. So.
Oh wow! So you are actually, because as soon as you said Overwatch, I'm like, I can't remember a StarCraft 2 map named Overwatch. I'm going to keep thinking of the Brood War map.
Yeah.
So that's actually your map, the Brood War Overwatch?
Yes.
All right. Well,
I'm pretty sure at this point, Negative is the most successful map maker either scene has ever had.
Yes. Very well maybe.
In total, like between the two.
In total, yeah. I think Freakling's a lot more accomplished in Brood War.
Yeah, in Brood War.
Yeah. The actually, I tried to get Freakling for the show a couple times, but he has some internet issues, so I haven't gotten that yet. But hopefully, we can do like maybe a Brood War map episode in the future, for which -0 maybe you could come back for. But anyways, let's talk about map making a little bit here. Now, I'm so ignorant on this subject, so I'm sorry about that ahead of time. I want for everyone to kind of learn more about what your scene is, what you do, all of you. Like, how do you come up with a map? Why do you like to make these maps? What kind of time commitment is that? Avex, maybe we can just start with you. If you can just start running us through some of what it is to be a map maker.
So for me, it's going to differ from person to person. Everyone has different styles, different wants, different tastes. Personally, for me, I take a very artistic approach to it. So sometimes it's as simple as me finding 2 colors and saying, what can I do with this and what can I put together? Because I have, I'm sure Negatives at this point too, pretty much the entire library of the StarCraft 2 assets memorized. Maybe not like consciously, but like I'll see like King's Cove and I can name you like every single model on screen and every texture like verbatim. So when I see like green and white, for example, I'm like, I know these certain colors can be these textures, and I can tint these models in a certain way to get this look. So that's my most common route. Other times it's music. So Year Zero, for example, was heavily musically inspired as well as aesthetically inspired. I rarely find layout inspirations. So I know one of the people I was most inspired by going into melee map making was Cantuva. He had a very diagonal kind of approach to things, very Brood War isometric style. And I know for him, he had a lot of layout inspiration. So how do I set up this middle in a certain way? What if I have this third nat interaction sort of thing? I don't personally get that. Mine's more of general shapes and colors. And then to the general question of what's it like to be a map maker, you spend hours and hours on end just pouring your heart into something, and then at some point you either realize it's not going to work at all and you scrap it, or you finish it and then you beg on Twitter, Twitch, Discord, whatever to get someone to test it, and no one does. And you go, well, best submit it to the map contest and hope I get feedback. And then usually the judges will give you some feedback, which you might disagree with, and then it's bouncing forth. And you're like, well, if I don't do the feedback, I might not get in. So it's a lot of games with yourself, and then games with judges, and then eventually games with players. And it's pretty stressful, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
That's my experiences, at least.
Sure, that's very interesting. That it seems like it's an artistic approach for you. You're looking at colors and what you can do with that, and music as an inspiration for your maps.
Yeah.
Maris, how do you come up with like the concept or the idea or start a map?
Well, usually I just open up the editor and a bottle of wine and just start doing stuff and see where it goes. And sometimes I do have kind of like the aesthetic idea, like with Disco Bloodbath, I had the idea of having a disco floor in the middle and then try to kind of build the layout around it. And it took some time. Usually it takes longer that way. Sometimes I have layouts without any aesthetic idea, and that might take some time as well, like just going through all the different textures and stuff before finding the one I'm happy with. But it's kind of, I don't know, usually it's just opening the editor and just main base, natural, third, all that, and just building it from there and see what seems to work in general.
So you kind of just open it up, fiddle around a little bit, and something catches your eye and interests you to move forward? Or?
Yeah.
Sometimes I get some different kind of ideas that I want to try out, but usually they don't really work that well.
Yeah, it gets kind of tough because subconsciously we're considering what pro players say. Maybe not specifically something like a Reaper Cliff, but like a lot of stuff like mains need to be this certain size, or naturals can't have this sort of thing. Because my philosophy is that the very beginning of your map will then dictate the rest. So everything you add on to it then affects what comes after. So if I put my main ramp in a certain direction, my natural is going to be set up in a couple different ways, and the natural can have certain setups that will affect the thirds. So to Maris's point, you will fiddle around with multiple configurations until you kind of get comfortable with something. And that's kind of why I was like, you might think this works, and then you get to the middle when you've done everything else, and you go, that's a shitty middle. I don't want that. And you're like, well, all right, start over.
Yeah, middles. I hate making middles.
Middles are hard.
There's quite a few ways you can.
Yeah, there's other ways.
Start on
course.
maps too. Like sometimes you actually get the idea for the middle first. From there, you build it outwards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried that a few times, but then I run into the problem that I can't really fit anything else. Like
you run out of space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of annoying as well.
It's tough.
I do tend to find though that like when I start with the middle, the map tends to be more like for like concept in general. Like Terraform, I started from the middle. I know
that makes sense.
Apotheosis, I started from the middle with the zigzag bridges down the middle. Sequencer, well, the whole thing is basically with a giant grid, but
yeah. And plus, that's inspired by a Brood War map too. So,
Negative Zero is. How do you start at the beginning? Like for instance, Maris likes, to just open the thing and fiddle, and Avix thinks of colors or music or something like that. Do you have a way that you generally start making your maps, like a way that you get your ideas?
I'm kind of completely the opposite of Avix. I completely separate the layout and creation process. I do the. What was I going to say? Okay, I'll start somewhere else.
Okay.
I have. If you want to say where I started from the beginning, it's basically I started from the beginning all the way back in 2013 because it's no secret in the map making community that almost all of my maps are based on other ideas or concepts, oftentimes my own maps. So I treat the entire thing as like an iteration process of like improving on older ideas, combining older ideas, transforming them into something that I think is unique or better.
Rotating catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the big one. A lot of times people say like, "Oh, Blue Shift is just rotated catalyst," when in fact, it's the main concept of catalyst, but also incorporating the central pathway from Blizzard's Frozen Temple, where you have a single narrow attack path down the middle with flanking routes around the sides that can be opened up later. So it's not quite the same, but yeah, it's all based on other ideas, stuff like that.
Yeah, you can definitely. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
What were you gonna say?
I was just saying you can definitely look at a lot of your older maps and start rotating them around and kind of shifting them and go. I can kind of see main nat third generally has a very specific setup with slight changes. Apotheosis, for example, the main nat third technically looks similar, but you have like the natural wall is slightly different, how it interacts with the rest. It's all
One
very
little
interesting.
secret that I'll let out. I have never made a map with natural that has a ramp. They're all flat chokes because I think walling those is just more convenient in general. It's just kind of my own style.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Wow. All right.
So
that's funny.
Yeah, I've never thought about that.
Yeah, aside from that too, like I tend to think of putting together the layouts as almost like a puzzle, like an engineering challenge. Just about getting all the flow and the proportions right. Like that. So yeah, a lot of my maps go through like dozens and dozens of iterations, just tweaking very small things. Well, trying to get the different parts just to get laid out the right orientation.
Yeah, that's really cool that the three of you take completely different approaches to starting your maps. But what about like your actual time commitment from start to finish? Do maps have like drastically different amounts of time that they take you? Like is this like a huge process? Is this something that gets done in a week, a month, a year?
All right. So usually what happens for me is Team Liquid Map Contest gets announced. I'll start like one or two maps way ahead of time. I think I'm got plenty of time, nothing to worry about. Just work on a little bit here and there. Those are usually like the maps that I have the main focus on throughout the duration of the contest. Put quite a bit of time into that. And then all of a sudden the deadline is coming up and I realize I've only done like one or two. And then that's when usually on like the last day or two, then if I have the time, then I'll just go into like super cram mode essentially.
That seems to be a common thing for a lot of the map makers now. Because there was a point where we didn't really have regular TLMCs. It was like once a year, and it kind of just popped up randomly. So there was a time where I feel map makers in general were a bit more active, but they still probably on average did like one map every like 2 months. I started my career making a map every week. That was kind of my spiel. So I'm kind of used to that. But now I don't really actively do that stuff. I'm more of a judge nowadays. I've judged the past 2 TLMCs, but I've definitely noticed, at least, looking around the Discord, it's pretty quiet. There might be some of the newer people are obviously being active because they need practice. But the older people like Sidian or Negative are relatively quiet on their own stuff. And then like Cantuva and I dropped the announcement that TLMCs and the whole Discord explodes. And all of a sudden there's like 40 maps in the Discord. I'm like, I can't look at it. And then you see some people post like 2 days before the deadline, I have one map and I can make 5 more like for the submission total. I was like, all right, well. So I think you'll notice this, Dan, is a lot of map makers have very different approaches to how they do things, to the time frames they do, how they allocate their schedules, because we all do have real lives too, you know.
Do we?
Okay.
Sure about that?
Some of us have real lives and can't really spend too much time. So it makes you kind of appreciate those who are really high quality for their allocated time. So like, for example, Obsidian does have his hits and misses, but he does have Abyssal Reef under his belt. And Abyssal Reef did have quite a bit of work into it, and he was not hyper active at the time. So it kind of lets you appreciate everyone's differences and what product comes from it.
I think everyone really starts out more active in the beginning, where they're really enthusiastic.
Passion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then as time goes on, become a grizzled veteran like me. You realize, wait a second.
And then you become Cantuva and just leave.
Either that, or you realize, hey, TLMC is really the only shot you've got at this, so that's where you put all your effort into. So yeah, just pretty much
Maris,
go active between those.
How long does it take you generally to put together a map?
That really depends. Like, I think Disco Bloodbath took a long time to make because I tried different layouts and they didn't work, and then the decorations and all that aesthetic took quite a long time to make. But then like Winter Skate, I think I made it in a few hours. Like,
oh, wow.
It was a really quick process. Of course, the fine-tuning some stuff later after the feedback added a little bit more, but that was a quick one. So it kind of, sometimes I struggle with some maps, like they're pretty nice, but there's just something amiss, and then I just keep working on it, like tweaking some stuff, and sometimes they just kind of happen naturally.
Well, all of you have kind of mentioned the TLMC, the Team Liquid Map Contest. Is that the centerpiece of the mapping community? Is that really why everyone makes maps? Is that like your WCS? Is it competitive? Can you tell us some about it?
Now it kind of is. In the past, this is a little before my time, so Negative might have a bit more insight into this. There were contests like Map of the Month and certain organizations that came with that, or the older TLMCs, and they were much more of a hobby thing because 2010 to 2013, for at least a lot of people outside of like actual Blizzard related StarCraft events, it very much was a hobby sort of thing. You did it because you loved the game and you wanted to see it change. And there are just people who have creative outlets that need to be tended to. And map making is a really, really easy way of doing that because you involve both layout and art into it. Nowadays, though, it definitely is kind of our little WCS. Not obviously as that big, but it is our drive. Back before, it was probably like no one really had. There's Blizzard maps, right? Opinions divisive, but there was Blizzard maps, and then Cloud Kingdom hit the ladder. It's like, whoa, and an actual user got their thing on the ladder, and then you also had GSL using their own thing. The Koreans had their own, similar to Brood War, map making thing that was separate.
Actually the winner of the very first TLMC.
Yeah, so that's what I was
they
going
weren't
with.
regular at the time. That was the thing. Had no idea what
very
the next shot was.
Right. So it's an evolution of going from being a hobby, things kind of people want to do casually, no different than like arcade or UMSs. And then over time, it became more serious, especially since pro players got more involved with speaking about maps because no one knew what the hell they were doing. Most people didn't know what they were doing in Wings of Liberty, right? So maps really weren't that much of a decisive factor, even if they might claim that it was for the individual player. Like most people were probably still like gold level, So what do they care about maps? Aside from aesthetics is the easy thing to look at, right? Oh, the map's green and it's bright, it's vivid, which is still the kind of the case today. People vote highly off aesthetic and not really logistic layouts.
Okay. Maris, how important is TLMC to your like motivation on making maps? Is it a huge central theme, or is it something that is just a nice side part of it?
I'd say it's pretty big for me. Like when I started, I actually wasn't sure if I could ever have a finalist map, and then, well, after I joined the map making Discord, a few months later, I have 3 finalists. So that was super great, and seeing pro players play on my maps just felt amazing for the like seeing it for the first time, and it's kind of something that motivates me to keep improving and making more maps and stuff like that. So.
And how about you, Negative Zero? You've been doing this long time. Is that is it a big part for you as well? Is that what you're looking for with map making?
TLMC is basically my only motivation now, really, because I mean, any map maker doing this kind of work has played.
Sorry,
there's a lot of
you cut out, yeah.
Oh, sorry. I just said that the ultimate goal of any map maker is really just to get your maps played by the pros, and that's how you do it. There's a lot of arguments saying like, oh, we should implement like smaller systems to get people prepared for TLMC, or to get like a little bit of opportunities, so not all the focus is on one thing. But as of now, that is the map tournament, and that's how your maps get played.
Yeah,
and the money. We can't skip the money. It's the only source.
Is the prize money good?
For the average map maker, yes. Older TLMCs, we had first place prizes of $1,000, but you only got money for top 5. And then after that one, I think me winning Odyssey was the last time we ever had 1,000 as the first place. After that, first place became 500, but being in top 16, you got $100 per map. So overall, more money, but if you got first, you're technically getting less. So it's weird. So for example, the TLMC we just had, Super Omen got all 6 of his submissions in the final. So it's already a straight $600, which is more than first place alone. So it's good money for the talented, and it's still $100 can go a long way if you're someone like Maris who's come up and coming, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the flatter prize distribution, just because it encourages more people who might not necessarily get into the top 5, but they can still maybe get like one finalist.
Yeah, I think it's really good.
They get rewarded.
Here's a little bit more difficult question regarding that, right? It seems to me that the map judging has to be a little bit subjective. When you guys see the rankings of maps, how do you look at the rankings and say, oh, they got pretty close, like not necessarily agree with it all the way, or
are we talking
like how do you look at that?
Are we talking
there's always a couple of rage posts in the map making Discord.
Are we talking about the polling after public vote, or are we talking about the closed judging, like to get into the top 16? Because there's 2 different things.
Let's go after both of them, actually. I just wonder how, because right, there is money on the line. You guys are putting in lots and lots of effort, and then it gets judged, and it's not like a tournament where Sarah wins, so he's the best player.
Okay.
It's more like there has to be some amount of subjectivity that you guys either agree or don't agree with.
So that's something I think I can only talk to because I'm the only person who's judged in this call. So it's really difficult because, okay, let's do a timeline. So TLMC's submissions over. So now we as judges have to look at generally about 300 maps, 200 to 300 maps from literally everyone and their mother. So this goes from the highest quality people like Negative Zero maps to Babby's first map. Just opened the StarCraft 2 editor 2 days ago. Like, we have to see everything, and we have to be as objective as possible. Of course, it's going to be subjective to some nature. So the struggle here is that it's really we're getting the topic of finding it difficult to play test and stuff, because it's also incredibly difficult to get people to judge in the first place. Most people see 300 maps, 200 maps, and go, "Fuck that! I don't want to do that." So you enter more subjectivity because now you have less people looking at the maps, which means less time to individually look at every map and be as objective as possible. So it's opening the front to be less objective by having time restraints and work restraints. So last contest, it was me and Music, we did this new thing where we kind of batched it down. So we quickly went through what we knew would not be TLMC ready. There were some maps that were really close, and we debated it, but our scoring was too opposite to each other, and the maps didn't get in. So I might have liked the map, but music might not liked it enough to not get in, and that poses problems, right? But that kind of problem can only be fixed if we jerk each other off and have the same opinion, or we get more people's opinions in, and the latter is much harder to do. So there are questions of racial bias. I was always a Terran player throughout. My peak was a Terran player in StarCraft 2. I did start trying Zerg, and I've tried to open a bit more to Protoss. The thing is, Protoss is really, really hard to design around in StarCraft 2. So I try to be as objective as possible, at least in reasoning. Design is another thing. But trying to be as clairvoyant as possible toward that sort of stuff, because I'm aware this is affecting pro players, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, as well as the money that goes into the map makers. So we batched out the first 100 or so, 150 maps, so we start narrowing it down. We keep narrowing it down until we get to a point where we think pro players are willing to look at a pool, a quote unquote pool, which was still like 70 maps. And so we did another pass, and we said, okay, with the judges that we had for the second pass, we can now see where all the judges lined up with what we thought were good enough. And then we did serious analysis of maps to get more realistic scoring, to see what maps are liked. And in the past 2 TLMCs I've judged, our top maps have been very similar to the top 5. So it's not like there's this drastic shift where.
Do you mean in the
the public voting is similar to what we voted highly? So for example, Acropolis was the top macro map in TLMC 12, and it was also first place in TLMC 12 for the public. So there's no like massive disconnect, which is a pretty big misconception where like the judges don't know what they're doing, but like you guys also support what we did anyway with your numbers. So it's pretty tough when it comes to subjectivity, because we'll start entering the realm of players expecting something versus map makers who are judges knowing how stuff is laid out and how it plays out, or at least they think they know. I'm not going to say we're gods, right? What we think will happen. So like if we see something, a pattern, I know this will be a liberator spot, right? Maybe the pro players missed that, but I didn't. So I might rate my thing lower. So it's a lot of tiny stuff like that that adds up, but usually it works out pretty okay. It's hell of an endeavor, I'll tell you that much. I wish Cantuva was here because he's done this for much longer than I have. But I'm pretty sure he would agree for the most part. It's tough, and it's something we consider. I love that GIF. It's so funny.
I'd like to add that even though a lot of times we know like which features maps need to have, which features are geared towards certain races, which are geared towards others, ultimately when you boil it down to the basics, judging map balance is kind of a crapshoot. It's very hard to predict exactly how the balance will turn out. Like if you look at Turbo Cruise 84 from the last season, people were looking at it in the beginning saying, look, this map's tiny, there's a straight push path directly from nat to nat. Slow zones are real bad for melee units. Zerg's gonna get screwed, basically. And then he gets on the ladder, and all of a sudden it's a Zerg favorite map. Who would have known?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very cool to hear about the actual process of judging the map competition. Now, when you were a map maker, and of course Negative Zero and Maris, you guys as well, when you're seeing your maps go through and get judged, what is that exactly? Like when they look at it, would you generally agree with some of the assessments? Would you look at that and say, yeah, maybe that was my weak map and that didn't make it that far, or something like that?
You don't see the judging It's
Mhm.
behind doors, because we want to avoid harassment toward judges. The whole judge group is completely private. No one except for the admins and the other judges know who the judges are, unless they
okay.
come out. So like
Mhm.
everyone knows I'm a judge, so they can discuss that with me. But there are concerns where, like, if I was a judge and you're a player, Dan, if we were talking during the judging process, you can influence my vote, which is bad. So
Mhm.
what you would be looking for is we do have a pre-feedback period where during the submission phase, up to a certain point, if you submitted a map early, judges could give you feedback before to improve it and then approve your score. So,
Mhm.
and we let anyone do that. So it doesn't feel like it's a one-on-one case, right? Like, let's say you and I are best buds. Oh, well, Avex is giving, Dan tips because he likes him, right? So we try to keep things as balanced as possible.
Okay.
Alternatively, we do try our best to give out feedback after the top 16 is announced. It's really hard because there are 300 maps. Something I forgot to mention is before I was a judge, it was not the case where we had this kind of cut down phase. Judges did look heavily into every map. So this is a thing that we're trying to improve on, both for map makers and for us. So after the top 16 is announced, we'll try and make out threads, or usually after the voting is done, we'll be like, hey, send us a map that you thought was really good. We'll tell you our reasons we didn't like it. And then we'll be like, we recommend you submit this next time. It was really good and maybe just barely didn't make the cut, which is really common.
Okay. Negative Zero and Maris, what are your guys' thoughts on the voting process and the judging process for the maps?
Let me consult my notes.
What iteration to do next?
People just have a problem, I think, with the diversity of judging in the contest. From what I've heard, it's very hard to get players of all races to come together and work together on this things. Some map makers say we need more map maker representation. I think that's kind of biased, but opinion. So anything else to add?
Yeah, to follow up on the point of races being incredibly difficult to reach, we struggle generally finding Terran judges quite a bit. Topical, I know, but we do. For the last two or three TLMCs, even before I was judging, I was like going on Twitter like, hey, can you judge? Hey, can you judge? Hey, can you judge? And again, it's daunting for most players to see 300 maps. Even if I offered to narrow it down to like 50, they'll still say no in most cases. And it's not like we don't understand that they have time commitments. Like, obviously all of us do. Like, this is a community effort, right? It's not like I don't get paid for judging. I got paid by Joel Must once, but he did that like out of being nice. We don't get anything out of this. So
I think it might be a little egotistical to ask, but I think it would help a lot if judges realize, like, hey, this is going to be your tournament future on the line right here, so maybe you want to contribute a little bit.
Yeah, if we want to kind of touch a little bit on recent events, it is difficult to be both a judge and or a map maker and basically beg for years to get feedback, not get any, and then get bitched out on Twitter. It's frustrating. So I didn't want to touch on it, but like but like we need to be careful with how we treat each other, right? We all need to be supportive. So like I had a bit of a tuffle with you, Thermal. We both settled in DMs. We're both cool. Like the goal should always be to cooperate and not instigate, you know? So I don't want to go up to like Special, who's properly upset, and be like, hey, fucking test it. Like, that's not going to make anyone happier, right? So it's a tough situation for everybody. I kind of lost where I was going.
Yeah, no. I see where you're going with it, and we'll definitely talk about that in just a moment here. I want to get Maris's thoughts first, though, on what the results of map contests. Do they generally line up with you, Maris? Where you think? Do you generally agree with what the community likes and the judges like as far as the map pool goes?
Yeah, usually there might be a map or two that I'm kind of not sure about, but in general, and also I know I'm pretty new, so I kind of trust the people who have been here longer and have done this for a longer time. So, but yeah, maybe a map or two. Sometimes it's like I'm not quite sure about that. But, yeah, but
okay.
About the judging thing, like during Asus Rock, I talked to several people that have been asked to judge TLMC, and yeah, they also said that it's just so much work. It's hard to find the time to go through the maps, even if it's much less than what the map maker judges go through. And yeah.
I do want to shout out Dr. Dario and Snoot. They were judges for a long period of time and did hella good work. They were probably the most active pros we've ever had when it comes to the map pool, and they're very considerate. Like every TLMC thread, either I think it's during submission phase, I'm pretty sure every time Snoot has made responses to multiples of maps, giving feedback and responding to people. So I just wanted to give them both a nice little shout out because they both deserve a lot of praise for what they did.
Oh, that's great to hear. I actually got a lot of ideas from pro gamers and stuff. Talked to them quite a bit about this coming into the episode, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I actually, before we get into the weeds of the specifics of some of the map making, I have a few more things I wanted to throw at you guys. First off, I'd like to know what map each of you is the proudest of making. Maris, why don't we start with you?
Yeah,
what map
Okay,
are you the most proud of creating? And
I guess so far Everdream. It came to the second place in the last TLMC. It's also kind of a Catalyst.
Catalyst clone.
Yeah, rotated. But I like it. It's very standard in its core, but still a bit different. Just a
Cool.
solid map, like, yeah.
All right, and Avex, what map are you most proud of?
I don't like to pride myself on my work very much. I'm very much I have a pretty strong inferiority complex, so I always compare myself to people like Cantuva in the past or Negative Zeros maps. I'll say I'm the most happy with Blackpink. I thought we had some really, really fun games on it. It's hyper standard. It's one of my favorite K-pop groups at the time. I involved two people I really cared about in that map as critters. Shout outs to Sal Epatry and then Miss Magic Tech Tracy. They both are critters in that map. So it was kind of my love letter to StarCraft is, ideally what you would think of as a StarCraft map, you got variations in high ground. The bases are super easy to take, but like realistically easy, and just lets you play both the early and the late. It's a pretty easy answer, I think, for me.
Cool. And Negative Zero, what's your most proud map that you made? It doesn't have to be a StarCraft 2 map if it's not.
I'd probably go with two different choices, completely opposites. Start out with Catalyst because it was kind of like the archetype of standard maps for a long time. That was like what you thought this is like a solid start. It combined a lot of ideas that I've been working on several years. I think the first version was actually 2014. And
you're cutting out a little bit.
It with some
Yeah, if you can just keep that mic a little bit closer to your mouth. There
Yeah, the first version was created around 2014. It's combined a lot of other maps that I'd made over the years into it to produce the final version. And so, yeah, that one. And then on the completely other side of the spectrum, Redshift, just because it pushed the boundaries so much. And because it pissed so many people off. And it made people really think about like different ways that you can use and abuse this map, which is what I really like to see in the game.
You mean Backpfeifengeschichte?
Oh yeah, the original name was even designed to troll everyone who's trying to pronounce it. It was a really long, complicated German name. Blizzard themselves stepped in and made me rename it.
Yeah.
So
very cool. Actually, and before we get into the super specifics, I do have a few other things that are starting to pop in my head that I really want to know from you guys. First off, well, actually, let's just jump into the maps that are the new maps for this pool, because I know 4 of these maps you guys actually ended up making for this new season. So Disco Bloodbath. Maris, this is one of your maps, right?
Yes.
All right. Can you just walk us through what you were thinking? What's cool about this map?
Why did you think it was good? Why'd you make this?
Like any aspects that you think are kind of neat? Just walk us through a little bit of Disco Bloodbath.
Okay. Let me put the picture up somewhere. Where do I find it?
And we'll throw that up as well.
Oh, okay. Now, right. So, like I said earlier, I started with the middle idea of the aesthetic, having the disco floor, which was kind of a meme, and I stumbled upon it kind of accidentally. I started kind of building the map around the middle, so it was kind of a harder process, but I decided to put the main not in the directly in the corner, like it's a bit next to it, and yeah, 2/3 options, pretty normal in the maps nowadays. I don't know, just try to make the thirds kind of easy to defend as well, because it's a macro map, so it should be a bit easier to take.
Yeah, it's a little difficult to discuss like the process, especially since the maps that we're currently talking about were probably designed in like February at this point.
Actually, I guess I made that like November.
Yeah. Some maps are older than that. If we're in the case of like Negative, who makes the maps literally last second, they might be as old as like February. So I think Acropolis was made in like late December. So it's a little difficult for some people to remember. And a lot of it, like we said before, is very subconscious and very just kind of like painting as you go. So sometimes direct decision making is incredibly like back of the mind. Like you'll know that something will happen here or will serve this purpose, but you might not like be able to state it. It's pretty hard.
All right, very cool. Thank you for that walkthrough. And then we have Ephemeron. That's -0. Is that your map?
Yes.
Can you walk us through Ephemeron a little bit?
All right. So ultimately, this map is kind of inspired a little bit by Destination, the Brood War map, where
Love that map.
You have a few sets of bridges through the middle that kind of constrict movements and force you around the edges for more optimal paths. Those 2 ramps right in front of the NAT originally were also double bridges like Destination. Like the NAT was originally on the low ground, but the judges didn't like the idea of having the third that was higher than the natural, so that changed. But the entire idea of bridges and chokes down the center of the map are still there. The extra bridges on the outer sides, which make the defending the outermost bases a little easier. So this will direct the main army movements around the central high ground. So you see there's the 2 sets of rocks that are on the high grounds at the very ends. Until you open those up, armies actually do have to pass across the bridges. So that creates that zone of like, this gives you an opportunity to intercept armies coming through and get that positional advantage there at the bridges. But later on, once you take the rocks down, then you can move around the outer edges and get that optimal wide late game attack path. Other than that, let's see. Because there's so many like bridges, ramps, defensive spots on the map, I tried to make the bases slightly more spread out than normal, just to compensate for increased defender's advantage. Let's see. Yeah, the base layout's fairly standard. All the Terrans on Twitter will love hearing that the third base is oriented optimally for drops because it's in a triangular orientation as opposed to the standard linear. I've heard that the third's a little far, but like I mentioned, the other bases are a little spread apart because of the position of the chokes. In this case, the second and third bases only have a total of 2 entrances towards that entire complex, as opposed to like 3 or 4 that you'll see in other maps like Catalyst, standard maps like that. So yeah, it's all a lot of trade-offs that theoretically I'd hope would make it balanced, but I mean, it's too early to tell right now. We'll see.
Yeah.
Games.
Very cool. All right, and then we have Winter's Gate. This was Maris. Was this your map?
Yes.
Okay. Can you walk us through Winter's Gate a little bit?
Yeah, so this has those slow zones or inhibitor zone generators, as they are actually called. So when the TLMC 12 got announced and we had this category to use these, I thought to make a smaller map. Like this is one of the smallest that has been in Legacy of the Void, right? Avex. One of like,
area-wise, probably.
Yeah.
I looked this up a couple days ago just to
Yeah.
find out. It is the 4th smallest Legacy of the Void.
Okay.
ever.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, if you
like-
consider stuff like Dasan Station, Turbo Cruise, and Belshire Vestige, it's not the smallest. Abiogenesis too.
Yeah, Abiogenesis is a bit larger.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one's smaller.
I'm just saying. I'm saying in
Abiogenesis.
general, they're.
Yeah, in the area. But yeah, like, so I set out to make a smaller map, but kind of standardish brush distance, and kind of wanted to have this like straight forward high ground path to the triangular third bases, with some of those slow zones kind of going through there, and also have 2 next to the main base, and then there's ones at the side high grounds as well. But you know, kind of wanted to have some slow zones that only affected air, but also have the ones that are on the ground kind of be situated so that you can go around them, that they aren't completely blocking the path. And then right at the third, there's the rocks as well, so you can take out the rocks and have this path where you can kind of go around it more easily as well, if you micro a little bit. Yeah, that kind of was the thought process.
I don't know if you mentioned it. Sorry. Another thing too is when the slow zones got initially announced, they were red.
Yeah.
So this aesthetic was way cooler, and then they changed it to green, and we're like,
it was so sad.
They were like these red domes, and it looked so sick.
The very first iteration of the slow zone was literally a recolored time warp.
Yeah, it was so much cool.
I thought it looked better, to be honest.
Yeah.
Damn. That does sound like it would look a lot different on this map.
Yeah.
And I tried to argue with Blizzard. I'm like, can you make it red again? It's like, well, we don't want to make it red. I'm like, well, green you might think speed up, and red like debuff. You know, buff versus debuff. Like red seems bad, so
that's fair.
What was the reasoning behind that?
I think they just. I don't remember what their reasoning was. I can't remember.
But also,
it was a while ago.
I also think the red was more visible, like if there's like lighter textures like white or something like that. The green really kind of disappears more
Imagine
easily.
putting slow zones on Ephemeron, you wouldn't see him.
Yeah.
Too green.
Yeah.
Okay. And World of Sleepers, -0. That's your map, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Can you walk us through it a little bit?
Let's see. This one was based on a really old map that I kept trying to get into TLMC a long time ago, called Exosphere. The same.
Catalyst.
It's got a little bit of catalyst in there. It really does. But you know, everything's based on everything else, so that's how it just kind of turns out. Yeah, the main concept is the choice of thirds. It has ideally 3 possible choices of third base. It has the standard option, like on that's the catalyst base. It has the this new feature, the low yield minerals, where you can mine them out really quickly and access that triangle third. And then it has a forward aggressive third base with a high yield geyser, so it gives a little extra incentive to take that. Yeah, originally speaking, the very first version, those minerals were rocks, but being able to open up a second entrance to the NAT, I mean, like that, it's not really good current gameplay. So the minerals, yeah, that makes it much more defender favored. The defender can choose to open them and access that base whenever they want to. And let's see, aside from that, it's basically a standard macro map. It's got a little bit of catalyst in it, a little bit of black pink.
Wait, where do you see the black pink from?
I was thinking of the vertical 5 base orientation.
Oh, okay, got it.
Where you have
yeah,
third on the high ground, fourth on the low ground, and then you have like a couple ramps to the corner base.
I see it. That makes sense. So why didn't you call this purple shift?
Purple shift. Blue shift. Because I am scientifically accurate. Okay, blue shift and red shift are astronomical phenomena. Purple shift is some random guy bullshitting about map colors.
Very cool. You know what? I mean, Triton is the other new map, and I know that none of you guys actually ended up designing it, but let's take a look and just you guys tell me what you think. Ever since this poor map maker is not on the show today, what do you guys think about Triton LE?
Horrible map, just completely awful.
I really like it because it was trying something I was doing quietly. I feel like that it's not obviously a early base to take, but it has like a kind of a King Sejong sort of forward base in the middle. At least that's what I think of when I see that base. It's very forward. It's probably a late game kind of base. It's very contested. I do like these kind of I personally imagine the kind of abyssal like arms. I call these arms along the outside. If you look at the corner bases, there's kind of a pathway that kind of curves down. I like how it just kind of splits up attack paths. I think when I was looking at this map for judging, I was pretty favorable of it. I didn't like how big the natural ramp was initially. I still think I hold by that because the third bases are relatively open. I felt like having an open ramp at the NAT was a bit tough too. This was a standard map, I believe. Submitted standard. I'm gonna take a look. Yeah. Everyone rated it pretty highly. So and I should remind the viewers that we do have pro players on the judging panel. So it wasn't just map makers jerking each other off. It was favorable map, and I don't think it has very many large flaws. There are like tiny things like the Reaper Cliff or like the Mule Trap. But I think it's a map that people will grow onto. The only change I would make would be maybe the horizontal third is a little too open. No, that's pretty much it. I think it's a good map.
You don't realize you can wall the Reaper Cliff off. Therefore, Terran will never win a game on this map.
Never.
awful. Just
Truly unplayable.
literally.
Literally horrible.
Aye.
Hey, well, thank you guys for going over those new maps. Very, very cool stuff.
Oh, by the way,
yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to mention,
please,
relating to the Reaper clips and all that.
Mhm.
In case you didn't check the patch notes, a lot of those more egregious things that people were complaining about actually were just changed.
Mhm.
None of the maps have cliffs that can be walled by a single pylon. It's all slightly.
Oh, okay.
Some of the I'm hesitant to call them bugs, but it's like overlooked features, like it's a wall and a natural ramp with a command center, things like that. Accidentally being able to drop mules behind the minerals, things like that are all patched out, so people should be.
Oh, okay. So a lot of the small little things are going to be fixed, like that.
There are still some people saying all the maps need more airspace, so we need to move our medevacs and warp prison around freely.
Yeah.
I was talking to the Blizzard rep, and we decided we'd keep the changes basically as small as possible for now. To started. Not to upset things too much, because people are also still getting balance patch.
Yeah. Okay. So to kind of transition over to that side of things, obviously, this map making episode is partially timed because we had a lot of complaints about the map pool, especially from professional Terran players on Twitter and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I got called a retard on Twitter for the first time. That was nice.
The first time. Oh, well.
I think so.
I've popped the cherry.
I've done a pretty good job of avoiding the saltiest of salt, but you know.
Yeah, no, it's there was definitely a lot of strong feelings from people. So what I went ahead and did was I messaged a bunch of pro gamers and kind of just asked for their thoughts on map pools, map balance in general, this pool, the last pool, just basically anything they would give me. And I got a huge range of responses. Let me just mention some of the players that I messaged and got messages back from. So the people who ended up responding for Terran, I got Special, Future, Marine Lord, Soul, and Masa. For Zergs, I got Snoot, Elaser, Rainer, and Cyril. And for Protoss, I got Puck, Mana, Neeb, Hurstum, Showtime, and Drogo. So cheers to my Brotosses who
a lot of Protoss,
yeah.
Protoss,
Zergs were not caring so much.
Right before we touch on this, I'm always surprised because Protoss historically struggle the most with new map pools, especially with like PvZ being such a hostile matchup or volatile matchup. You got to learn the walls properly. The matchup swings so heavily. And yet I always felt like they didn't complain that much. Like they might make small, like offhanded comments like, oh, this map's kind of hard. The third's too much. But never felt like a Protoss was like actively completely screaming at something. So props to them.
As much as we like to meme about complaining and whining and things, Protoss do complain the least. That's a fact. Like the Protoss players in general do complain the least.
I don't think a Protoss player.
Maybe because they haven't. I don't know. Whatever reason it may be. So I guess let's talk about some of the kind of like things that people have complained about. The tougher, the very small things. Because we've kind of gone over the bigger thing, like how do you design a map? What are you thinking about? What are you looking at? But for instance, right, something that a lot of Terrans were whining about were those Reaper jump spots. Okay, obviously the Reaper, you want to jump it up to scout into your opponent's main base to see what they're doing, especially TVP. A lot of Protosses try to wall that in. Sometimes there's a one building wall, which was being complained about, but you mentioned that some of that got fixed out. And then sometimes there's bigger walls. Sometimes it's unwallable, so the Reaper can always get in. Now, the funny thing is none of you three are designing the whole map pool, right?
Yeah.
So
correct. It's completely
that should
Wizard.
Really, so you guys are just designing a map or multiple maps, right, to enter competitions. You don't expect for all your maps to go there or anything like that.
Correct.
But I wonder, as map makers, how do you think about specifically Reaper jump spots? Is this something that doesn't really occur? You're like, oh, I'll make it this big here, or is it something that you put a lot of thought into? How does that work?
So something to, again, touch on is that most of the map makers, if not all of them, all want the same thing as the pros. We all want to reach a point where everyone's happily playing the map, everyone's having a good time, everyone's not complaining, right? So I don't think a single map maker disagreed with the whole Reaper Cliff thing. I think our issues were more about the lack of testing. That's where our frustrations came from. I don't think anyone really cared that, like, it's really easy to fix a Reaper Cliff. For example, I remember Blackpink didn't have a Reaper Cliff initially. A bunch of people asked for it. I added it, sent it to Blizzard, and it got uploaded. Like, it's really easy for us to do certain changes like these. So in general, when it's like, yeah, if there are public complaints of this magnitude, I'm sure we'll be more like concerned about it when designing something. Sometimes it just slips the mind. Like Acid Plant, for example, wasn't made by someone who's regularly a map maker. That didn't have a Reaper Cliff. There were some complaints about Acid Plant, but not nearly of this much. So certain things are going to be more considered. Generally more basic things. This space is too open. This ramp is too large. It's too tight. This is a choke that's too abusable. Are there liberators? But like much more serious issues like tank spots are going to be addressed. Smaller things like a Reaper Cliff might get overlooked because of that. Because we can all imagine how horrible Twitter and Reddit would be if New Repugnancy had way more cannon spots, way more tank spots, liberator range spots. Like that's worse for us than a simple change like a Reaper Cliff. Or like maybe a mineral line's not open enough, like stuff like that.
Sure.
A lot of the issue is that map development, just by nature of the process it goes through, tends to kind of lag behind the actual pro meta in a lot of ways.
That's true too.
Yeah.
Just because a lot of times it's like 6 months to a year almost before a map that you make and spend a while refining and enter it into TLMC, and it goes through the judging process, and it gets sent to Blizzard, and you wait for the old maps to get rotated out before the new one gets added in, and by that time, a lot of times the meta is shifted. So a lot of times, some of us were of the mindset previously that Reaper Cliff that can be walled by a single pylon is pretty much standard. But some of the older maps, like Ascension to Ire, for instance, just did not have a Reaper Cliff at all. People complained about it at the time. And so, as the whole 3-Rax Reaper builds died out, we did adjust very gradually. Like maybe we can add more and more Reaper slots, but for a while it was kind of deemed normal for that middle ground of having a Reaper slot, but it's wallable. And so now we're realizing, I guess the meta has shifted again, and that maybe it is viable to have a more open cliff here. So we'll take that into account for future TLMCs, but you won't see that for a few more months as of now because we have to go through that whole process again.
Like a lag.
To touch on that, so I was surprised that we kept the previous map pool for so long, because we just finished TLMC 13 and we still don't have those maps in the current pool, which makes sense because we're entering BlizzCon map pool. I'm sure Blizzard has a philosophy of how they set up certain map pools for certain seasons. So with this in mind and this discussion, I know I reached out to someone in the Blizzard team. I asked if they had started the QA process, because once they do, it's game over pretty much. They have not started QA for 13 yet, so I'm going to try to see if we can get like another iteration phase going through the top 16 if they're available, and we can check things like Reaper Cliff and all that. Yeah. So if anyone's watching is willing to test, it would be super, super, super useful if you search TLMC 16 or 15. Wait, what number? Tell me 13. Sorry. Too many. TLMC 13 on customs on all servers. I do believe we're done uploading all of the post iteration maps. If not, I'll send out a tweet that when we do. But if you can give us as much feedback as you possibly can about the smallest stuff, is there a mule trap? Is there not a Reaper Cliff that's suffice in a certain place?
I don't want to give too many. I don't want to give too many spoilers or something, but I know for a fact that people have been approached by Blizzard reps
Yeah.
about concerning TLMC 13 maps that are going to be added to the next season of Ladder after this.
Yeah, that was
yet another section.
That was definitely following this whole thing. So if anyone's out there, please do try, if you have the time, to give us feedback that prevents something like this happening again. Because again, we're all on the same page here. We all want everyone to be happy. We don't want everyone to be pissed off. It doesn't make our lives easier. It doesn't make your life easier. You have a better ladder experience. If you're a pro player, you're not going to lose a couple $1,000s. So I just wanted to say that much.
Sure. You know, okay, so Reaper jump squats, obviously that's kind of one of the smaller points, I guess, overall. And this part is actually kind of more coming from me, something that I thought about that would be, I look at it as something that would be very difficult in designing these maps. How do you take into consideration something like the Reaper jump spots, like having multiple locations to get in, and like the power of, let's say, like an aggressive blink attack or something like that, right? Because both of those would utilize a similar area, and I know we don't see like as many aggressive blink in all-ins or anything like that anymore, but there's a lot of things that are like that where it's like, oh, well, this same feature that might make it easier for Terran to scout might make it easier for Protoss to attack them. How do you balance something like that when you're making your maps?
No one? So
Oh,
this is a really hard one. I was thinking about it, writing my notes. So this one is something that is going to be subjective. I think it's very subconscious. Sorry, not subjective, subconscious. There is probably a measurable way to find out what is too much for a blink cliff, or and not enough for Reaper cliff. Usually it is positioning. We do know there is a set range for blink, for example, which does kind of touch the previous point of where a Reaper cliff might be skipped. It is entirely possible a map layout had a Reaper cliff at one point. Critiques were brought up that this is a blink area, so they straight up removed everything and then just forgot to account for that change. So again, Negative did say that we are lagging behind usually the meta. We try our best, to the best of our ability, to keep up. Blink has been coming in and out. I do know there's a pretty popular TVP Blink build right now. It's honestly really difficult. So usually what I've found is if you keep the Reaper cliff somewhat close to the main ramp in terms of vision. So obviously a Terran Raxabli Duo has its inherent vision, so it's easier to spot this sort of thing. You have naturally Viking positioned. You have your tiny little bioforce if you're doing a push. Very centered to your natural, the forward part of the natural. So if your Reaper cliff's around that same area, naturally it's harder to apply blink pressure. Especially if you count things like if your main ramp is positioned in a certain way that Tech Lab can't be sniped from a triangular position. So I'm thinking like Kairos Junction, for example, right? That would be a triangular position, but the terrain is pushed out a little bit just so that a stalker can't be pecking, that sort of thing. So it's really tiny adjustments you have to consider like that, which is why towards the beginning of our show I mentioned my philosophy is everything you do from the beginning affects what comes next. So it's something you have to kind of work with over time to get better at, especially since we have a lot of our older map makers no longer doing that much. Cantuva, myself, for example, kind of took a step back. People like Sidian kind of only come around for TLMC and then dip. The author of Kairos Junction, Solstice, is no longer actively map making. So when you have up-and-comers like Maris, we do have others like Invalid, Polar, PK Lixian. These are the people who need feedback the most, because we can, as experienced map makers, can give very general advice. It's tiny things like this that might be a bit harder to explain. So that's how I would probably view Blink versus Reaper, to shorten it, keeping that cliff in question close to common vision areas or engagement areas. not like Odyssey, where Odyssey had its Reaper thing way in the back. So both Blink and Reapers were an issue at that time. That's how I would kind of think about it.
Maris, how do you try to think about keeping that type of balance where it can be good for one race but overpowered for another?
Like usually when I do the Reaper jump spots, I place them quite close to the natural choke point. And yeah, I remember during TLMC 12, my map that made it to the finalist, Rest Calm, it actually had quite open natural, like you could blink to it from the
Yeah,
ground.
I'm getting it.
Yeah, I remember that there was some concerns about that because there was like some patch coming, but it got reversed to something. People were afraid of the blink stalker stuff, but it got changed or something like that. But yeah, that was very open. Probably not going to do that again, but still in the learning process. So
Sure.
yeah.
How about you, Negative Zero? How do you keep that kind of balance between making things, reasonable for one race or overpowered for another?
Like Avik said, it's really just subjective. It's hard to tell exactly how things will work out specifically for one race because, again, we're not pro gamers. We're not optimizing builds entirely to find exact right positions to put things, to use certain things. So yeah, it all just boils down to watching some pro matches, seeing what they're doing, trying to accommodate that time. I don't think there's really anything else that can be done besides that. I mean, obviously, we would like to get some people, higher level people, to give feedback through the entire process. Help, I would think.
Yeah.
But as for what we can do, it's just look at it, judge what you can.
Yeah.
Hope it works out.
Yeah, good luck.
It seems like it's funny, right? Because we had a lot of flaming on Twitter and all that, but really at the end of the day, it comes down to Blizzard chooses the map pool, and the pro gamers don't test the map pool that much. Actually,
that's another thing that I was going to talk about is the whole system. I'm not saying this is bad. This is just kind of how it is. But the whole system of Team Liquid, Team Liquid map contest is geared towards picking certain best maps of each category, but there isn't really any regard paid towards whether those top maps necessarily all work together as a cohesive pool.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
That's
so. You'll end up with maybe it just so happens that all of the maps that were at the top this time are a little larger, a little harder scouting.
Yeah. That's it. I love that you said that. Sorry, 1 second. That's actually what most of the Terran players were kind of responding to me with overall, was that overall this pool, just kind of the maps are a little bit bigger right now, in addition to some of that Reaper stuff going on. And it was interesting to see the different responses. Like, for instance, Marine Lord mentioned, and I really liked some of the responses he gave me, where he was saying specifically this is something that Blizzard needs to do. It has nothing really too much to do with map makers, but it, like, basically looking at the win percentage for maps that they bring over from the previous season, and then adding in, like, okay, are these all really big maps where it's hard for where all the bases are close together or something, right? And that makes it hard for Terran to do their harassment or something like that.
So I wanted to ask you, because you do have a bit of programmer history behind you. There's no definition of what makes a map big. So from what I've found out from my own research, I think what pro players are trying to say is that maps are base dense. Like, they have a lot of maps or bases close together, because I've done rush distance measurements for every map since the beginning of Legacy of the Void. And pretty much every main-to-main distance has been around 43 seconds on average.
Yeah.
And every natural is
graph.
about, and I have graphs of these, so I'm not just talking out of my ass. And every natural is around 35 to 38. And they don't really fluctuate very hard. You have maps like, I kind of skipped over the 4-player maps because those really skew the data, and they don't really, no one likes 4-player maps anyway, at least at the pro level. So if we just look at 2-player maps, because that's the vast majority of maps in Legacy of the Void, rush distances have been pretty standardized, and they have been since before I was even doing this. If we look at map dimensions have become standardized and have actually shrunk since the beginning of Legacy of the Void, and are now pretty much around the same level. So that doesn't go towards the idea that maps are getting bigger. So it's both rush distance and map bounds are smaller or shorter or the same. So that leads only base density being the one factor, and that's kind of hard to really measure. So I'm wondering, is that really what pro players are trying to say? Because this is really useful information for us.
Yeah, that's, well, I love that you bring that up, because Special in his comments to me addressed this specifically. I think that you're right. We don't have the right vocabulary to discuss these ideas exactly. So some very general terms get thrown around, like large map, right? Where maybe that's not exactly right. So what Special said specifically on that was that things like natural to natural rush distances don't really matter that much, because you don't really have people leaving their natural to attack another natural. It's more about how big the map is in general, and like clear attack paths versus dead space of air, like how far apart expansions are and things like that.
Well, you heard him, map makers listening. Rush distance doesn't matter. Go make the next solid station. Go make the next abiogenesis.
Go make Invader
Looking
with like a 1 minute and 10-second rush distance.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a lot of hyperbole in pro gamer speak, but
so sorry, can I ask?
Yeah.
I'm asking Special pretty much. So attack paths, are we talking, because like Terrans obviously are going to be utilizing medevac play quite a bit. Because this to me sounds like, when a Terran is out on the map, somewhat outside of his natural, right? Not like literally right out there, but kind of out and about. Are we considering the point of around center to moving to the side where a third or a fourth might be, or dropping into the main, dropping to the side? Because that becomes much more convoluted and harder to, because that's more talking about a middle layout or a side-based layout. Because again, this is a vocabulary issue. This is also just two sides not communicating and struggling to communicate as a language barrier kind of its own. So I'm asking Special, because I'm sure he's watching. What exactly are we talking about when discussing army movement? Are we talking between sections, like kind of like coordinates of a map, like this part of a map versus this part of a map? We can talk about opposite corners, which appeals to late game play. Obviously, I'm going to use an extreme example, like Waystation, for example, where it had like two super close mains and two super far. If we pretend that the two super far bases were actually corner bases and not mains, like that would be insane late game as opposed to the early game, right? So these are sort of things that are really, really hard without direct play testing. Like this is something map makers will not really be able to figure out on themselves. Like, we're all acknowledging we're not pros, right? We're not GM. I peaked at Masters myself, but like I'm not gonna say I was good at all. So this is sort of something that we would need more discussion around. Hopefully direct communication would be super useful.
Certainly.
Yeah,
and I don't have exactly the answers you're looking for. I just kind of have what they have responded in general. Yeah. No, it's difficult to get all that. One of the things that I saw very interesting was the thoughts on dead airspace from the various pros. So, for instance, basically every Terran player mentioned dead airspace. Obviously, medevacs, liberators, drops, all these things. It makes it pretty obvious to see why Terrans want a lot of dead airspace. Whereas the Zergs didn't seem overly concerned, but knew that dead airspace was not for them. And then the Protosses were exactly in between, where, for instance, like
Puck wanted some.
yeah,
Puck
like
in the
Puck
past
wanted
wanted
more
some.
airspace. Yeah, Showtime mentioned he'd like a bit more dead airspace. Otherwise, the
War
Queens
Prison
defend Oracles too much, right? Yeah, but at the same time, there was some Protoss sentiment that too much dead airspace, like Carson brought up. If medevacs are idling between natural and main, or natural
can't be
and
hit by
third,
stalkers.
Yeah, exactly. It's
That's
like
fair.
can you clear this type of area? So, yeah. Your guys' thoughts on dead airspace? Why don't we start with you, Maris?
All right. Wait.
Me?
Yeah, Maris.
Mhm.
Oh, so
The new one.
oh my god. I guess there's like maybe the biggest problem is if it's like around the like main natural third, like spots where it can be abused too much, like Zerg might not be going to Spire and doesn't have anything that can actually do anything about liberators, for example. So that's kind of the problem. But if it's further out in the later bases, then maybe we could actually like have more airspace there. So like late game, harass is more viable for Terran and stuff like that. But it's kind of difficult, fine line to walk in a way, because it can be kind of broken if there's just be too much airspace.
Sure. -0. What is your
All
thought on
right.
the dead airspace
Here's
thing?
where I am going to get a lot of hate. And I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not the map making community as a whole. I say I don't like airspace. I think it's a bad for game design. I think air units are too powerful in StarCraft 2 right now. I think the ability to ignore terrain in general doesn't make for exciting matchups. So a lot of times when I have maps where there's not a lot of airspace around the edges, that's intentional. I did that on purpose. That brings me to another point I was going to get to, which is there's a lot of debate, I think, and a lot of not necessarily open debate, but what people think about when you think of the role of map makers in the game, which is, should they focus entirely on balancing the game as it is, or should they have input into the actual design of how the game is played? And I think the pro gamers generally shift more towards the game is what it is right now. You should try to make this work as best you can, exactly how it is right now. But I mean, some of the map makers, I mean, we obviously like to see our contribution to have an effect. So we're thinking, well, if we make this map with these certain features, we can actually adjust how it's played. You can see that in certain Brood War maps, like Blizzard didn't do anything. Map changed how the game was played there, but
yeah,
that's how I tend to think of airspace in general. It's just, I get why people like it. I get why it's good for certain units, certain races, but in general, I just don't think it makes for exciting gameplay to be able to maneuver around units that easily, to ignore the terrain.
Yeah, definitely a different point of view. Where do you lie on this subject, Avix?
I partially agree. I've gone on many rants. I know Gemini's in the chat, so I know he's heard these rants. I also hate air units. I don't like instant teleportation around the fucking map. Like Nidus's, get it out. Like Warp Prism, stop. Like I don't like early tech and an RTS to basically ignore half of like the design of the game, right? I think I've briefly talked with you about this, Dan, maybe a BlizzCon or two ago. Like I'm very centered, like design wise, Brood War. I got my beginnings in Starbow as well, so I'm kind of pushed that way. So I like the trade-off of Brood War, where shuttles and dropships and dropper lords are very slow. Powerful units are generally slower, more vulnerable. They have really long acceleration. I don't like stuff like medevac boost, where I can just load up and go over 200,000 area in like 3 seconds. I don't like that. But with that being said, I have to be aware that this is where I differ from negative. Is I do think that I am not the height of what the scene should be. So I have to take my role as I'm the most socially active map maker to realize that potential and to use it responsibly, at least as responsible as I humanly can. So because people don't know -0 or Sidian or Cantuva or Maris, I can't be making statements that are going to be taken as the map maker as a whole, as a scene. So if you're asking personally, I personally would say airspace is probably going to be somewhat required. I've been testing certain measurements, like adding 2 cells here or there on each axis, or 1 even would be okay. It's hard because when you implement stuff like, for example, if a medevac can sit in a corner, you do also affect how main mineral lines will have to be set up, because if it's too close to the edge and you have the airspace, you create a liberator spot, which cannot be touched. I mean, I don't know how many people remember Backwater when it came out, had a tiny, tiny liberator spot that I overlooked. That's why that natural was so awkwardly shaped, the in-base third, sorry. It was really awkward because I kept finding these tiny liberator spots that I was trying to fix, and it's like, fuck, I missed another one. So it's a dangerous thing, airspace. I do remember when Abyssal was in the pool, some Protoss players, I remember Puck was talking about how he loved the Warp Prism play. I do remember other issues. I remember Ravens were a big problem back then. Liberators were a problem. So it's tough. It's really tough. And the other thing is too, we have to be careful catering to one player's play style. So like Nate, for example, Nathanius plays mech pretty much only. So are we gonna always appeal to someone who only plays mech, or do we appeal to the broader player base? Do we appeal only to pros? Do we appeal to everybody? Like, it's really hard. So that's kind of how I stand on. It's a general response, but airspace is tricky, is my point.
No, certainly. And I like that you guys both kind of brought up the way that Brood War balances through maps as opposed to anything else. It's kind of how you maintain what's going on. And you see things like Legend of the Fall. It's like, yeah, Protosses win at that time of the year. Is it Magic? No, they switched the map pool. And that's actually something Marine Lord brought up too, is he'd like to see more of the balancing being done through intelligent map choice, which is interesting. But of course, that goes back to Blizzard choosing the map pools. It was very interesting reading some of the different pro gamer opinions on the map selection process, which I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on. Because, for instance, the Terrans in general, Special, Future, Marine Lord, Soul, Massa, it seemed like they were very in favor of having quite a varied map pool, where there's some maps that are quite good for Terran, some maps that are not very good for Terran, and maybe some interesting maps in there, or something like that, right? Just a kind of a general broad stroke of those opinions. And then, for instance, Snoot's very well thought out example was trying to maintain maps that have the closest win percentage overall. And trying to get the maps as close to 50% as possible, and no more than plus or minus 5%, hopefully. What do you guys think about the difference between like maps which quite favor a race and building towards that, and like totally allowing maps like that to exist, as opposed to just trying to get maps that in general keep a pretty even win percentage? And I'm not perfectly saying Snoot's viewpoint here. It was very long. I'm trying to make it into a nice,
as per Snoot
easily packaged
responses.
question. Very well thought out. Good stuff from him. But yeah, what do you guys think about that?
Anybody?
I would say go ahead.
Okay. if you have something, I could go for a while on this one.
All right, I'll be quick. If it's up to me, I would say that try to have a few maps that are fairly standard, and you keep them in for long periods of time. I guess try to keep the win rate around 50%. But I also think there should be a couple slots in there that should be more experimental than current, and just constantly throw crazy shit out there. Basically. See if it works, and if it doesn't, then rotate it out to something else. That's the only way that we're going to find out what's acceptable for FQ map making in general. I think over the years, Blizzard's been often a little too conservative with some of the things that they allow. Not allow. I think the pro players have been a little too conservative with some of the things that they would accept. And I think part of that is due to the structure of the map pool, where things just don't change fast enough, so that when you have something that's broken, it gets figured out and stays broken. So yeah, I do think a combination of being more experimental along with having faster rotating maps, whether that's maybe a dedicated slot for experiments, that would help us. That's obviously a very map maker oriented opinion. That would help us determine what's viable and what's not.
Okay.
So I think we're kind of touching back on the point of what a map maker's role is. I personally don't like the idea of having intentionally balanced maps because we're entering tournament structure as well. Not every matchup is best of 7. So if we enter a best of 3, let's say it's TVZ, we have 2 maps that are good for Terran, 2 maps good for Zerg, and like 3 maps for Protoss. Let's just, because we have to have one that's odd. So obviously we have pick ban phase. If the Zerg bans the Terran maps and the Zerg bans the Terran bans the Zerg maps, we have these 3 good Protoss maps, and where did those win rates go, right? Because are we saying good per matchup? Are we saying good in general? And then if it's good in general, or either of these, is it fun for a player to go into a series saying, I am extremely unlikely to win this map? I don't think that's really good tournament setup. Like, I'm sure at a conceptual level, Terran players or Zerg or whoever will think, oh yeah, I want Zerg or a map specifically good for me, which might be good for you on the ladder, but probably would harm you in the long term in tournament play, especially if you're not a mechanically solid player like Cyril or like Stats. I feel like the average player like Future, who's up and coming, might suffer in a tournament structure like this. So then we kind of enter the idea of having larger map pools. I had a discussion with somebody a couple weeks ago, and unfortunately, it seemed that larger map pools were not going to be a considered question for the future. I can't say much else than that. I don't want to misspeak for that person, but I always had this fantasy of having a separate map pool specific for matchups, so that like it's balanced for a matchup. So like a map is not going to be tested for anything but like TVP. And it's 50-50 TVP. And that map is specifically catered to certain play styles on that map. I'm like, that could be kind of cool. I also thought of stuff like, if let's say it's a ZVZ map, as a map maker, we're actually able to paint creep. I've always wanted to do something with that. But obviously, if I would put it on a normal map, I'm going to just buff Zerg and anyone else can get screwed. So like, what if I use this on a ZVZ map and have like a creep trail through the center? I'm like, well, that'd be kind of cool. But so I would like stuff more like that. It's a bit more fun. That's more experimental. But it doesn't like hinder any player in a tournament.
Okay. That's a very different opinion there. That is a hell of a lot of maps if you were to do that.
Yeah, it's a lot. I like more. More is better.
Okay. Let's see here.
Yeah, some people have mentioned in the map making Discord, like the idea of having maybe an opt-in test pool for maps, like a secondary set of maps that choose to play in addition to the regular ladder. I'm not sure how the logistics of that would work out and how Blizzard would choose to implement that. It's an idea thrown around.
All right. Oh no, go ahead.
Oh no, I was done. Sorry.
All right, no problem. Okay, so let's jump over to something a little bit stranger. Some of the more out there maps. For instance, Turbo Cruise with these slowing zones. It was very interesting to see only 3 players that messaged back mentioned that they don't like the slowing zones specifically, and that was Rainer, Cyril, and Neeb. So some pretty high company, with Neeb mentioning that he actually thought maybe it had to do with slow zones are like a debuff. Maybe it would be cool to try something like that gives a buff instead, like maybe a speed up. Maris, let's start with you. What do you think about, because I know your map has some slow zones in it. What do you think about this type of, like, obviously it really changes the dynamic of a map. What do you think about like the debuff compared to a buff, and just in general that type of map?
Well, there have been like quite a lot of talk in the Discord about this, like different new features, and pretty many people have actually said that they would actually like the buffs more than debuffs, you know. Like, I think I personally would like something that is a bit more, you know, choice for the player to do something. It's not just there existing like the slow zones, but something that gives a bit more strategic, you know, like turning something on and off, and something like that might be a bit more interesting. Like one thing that I maybe would like is kind of bridges that could be destroyed and rebuilt or something like that, to give some new paths around the map or something. But maybe they are a bit too similar to rocks, and the collapsible towers and stuff like that. But
yeah,
it would be more interesting than just some slowing circle. Yeah.
All right. Avix, what about you? What do you think about those ideas?
So for me, I remember one of my first posts to Reddit was a new concept for destructible like terrain. I basically had ramp creation, and I also had bridge creation. So a rock tower that if you broke it would actually form a bridge that you could cross, and you could also destroy the bridge. And I remember one of the common comments for that was, why don't you just have a bridge with rocks on it? And the idea is that you have counterplay. So for example, if let's take a natural and I have this rock bridge on it, if I break it as the player, it's my choice. Whereas if I have a bridge that's already made with rocks on top of it, either player can make that choice. So it removes the sense of defender's advantage from that, which I think was the largest complaint about that one Heart of the Swarm pool with Expedition Lost, Bridgehead, all the, and like, what was it called? Moonlight Madness, all these back doors in the main and the nat with rocks. It removes this kind of fair player agency, because a defending player doesn't want to break those rocks, since it makes them have a path that they probably don't want, especially if you're a Protoss or a Terran player against a Zerg. Same with like these ramp creation kind of things, having an attack path that doesn't exist, and then outplaying your opponent, creating a path, using position. I'm a very positional player. I loved playing TVP in Brood War and TVT later on when I wasn't Protoss. So I have that kind of bias. I've had other ideas, like a rock tower that creates a mineral line. I thought would be kind of cool, because it's invulnerable barrier unless you mine it out kind of thing. I'm also of the opinion, and I've told some of the Blizz guys this too, I don't like having one map centered around one feature. I don't like having one map with only slow zones. Like, my point to them was, these features over time will get us to a point where we're like Brood War. We have what Brood War has, those installation doors and mineral walls and eggs and disruption webs. You know, they have all of these things available to them at any time. There are maps that are featuring some of these things, like Monty Hall has only mineral walls. That's its prime feature. But I would like to reach a point where it's not just Turbo Cruise is a tiny map with slow zones to make the standardized rush distance. That's where I kind of stand on that.
All right, -0. Slow zones versus buff zones of some sort versus just weird things in general.
I am generally in favor of weird things.
Mm.
I actually like the slow zones as is. I think we haven't figured out exactly what's the best way to use them yet.
Mm-hmm.
But
I would agree with that.
I think the slowing feature is probably better theoretically for increasing defender's advantage if you use them right, which is something I think is a little lacking in the game as is. So once we figure out what's the best place to use these, then I think they could really improve how maps are designed.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed, in regard to what Avex was saying about giving defender agency to control when these features are activated, I think the low yield minerals that we've recently been introduced are a decent way of accomplishing that, because the defender will always have workers near their bases, and they can open those paths when they choose to, but the attacker, if they want to open those paths, has to bring workers across the map. Not only that, but they have to survive the minerals while fire from the defender. So if you want to create pathways that can open when the defender wants to, then in the current implementation of the game, that's the way.
Okay. I think so. I think for mineral, I think he's touching a good point where a lot of this is me more speaking to map makers. When I was judging actually both times with mineral walls, there was a lot of layouts that had mineral walls quite far from being realistic. So like on Thunderbird, for example, we have tiny patches in the center, and I thought it was personally just enough to where a pro player might use it to kind of get around certain pathways, but maybe not as much as it was realistic, like people bringing workers out there. So if you looked at the final results for the last TLMC, we have a map called Golden Wall, where pretty much it's for the defender to decide who uses that mineral wall, but there is a base there, so like proxy hatches can be kind of a thing. So it's very much a proximity relationship that goes on with mineral walls. I don't think maps that have these really long stretches of mineral patch walls out in the middle of nowhere, no one's gonna use those. Like, especially if their mineral count's too high. Like if they're 5 minerals, I guess, but if it's an 8 mineral patch long wall, no one's gonna bring 8 workers out there, and no one's gonna have a worker go back and forth 8 times. So mineral walls are tricky. I think most of the time from now on we'll start seeing maps that are very defender focused. Even World of Sleepers is one of those maps that uses it very close proximity to the natural of the defender.
Okay. There's an overall thing that I saw from pro gamer responses about the possibility of guidelines for making maps. Now that's kind of like a big idea, like whether or not should there be Blizzard mandated guidelines. Do you guys have guidelines of your own? Do you think that there can be a set of things where it's like, okay, never have this, or like in general maps should have this? Do you know what I mean? Like, is there
unwritten rules but actually be written?
Yeah. What do you
recommendations?
Think of this
good
idea?
idea.
Yeah.
Recommendations, good idea. Official guidelines, absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm on that stance too. We do have unwritten rules. There are things. So it also depends when we go from newer map makers to people who are experienced. So just like learning any sort of trade, you want to start with basics. You want to have a certain set of fundamentals down. So we can use something like Catalyst, for example, or even Blackpink. When I started out map making seriously, I spent days opening up ladder maps and measuring things. How far is this to this? How far is this to this? And then, you know, how certain things are laid out relative to each other. So I generally give that advice to newer map makers. I'm pretty sure I gave it to Maris too. And with that in mind, it is good to have quote unquote guidelines for newer map makers to understand a set of standards to what players won't get pissed off at them. Right? Like certain main is this distance from the net. We generally have bases for if we use the control M solution, the measure distance, it's literally the line formula. X1 over X or X1 minus X2 over Y1 minus Y2. And we generally have bases around 30 to 40 measured distance from each other. Mineral lines are standardized already. There are tinier things like, for example, Terrence complained about Cyber Forest having a 111 vertical setup be available. So like main sizes are pretty standardized at this point. So we do have these things already. But if pro players are starting to get specifics, like we need to have a tank spot available for the natural, when you start doing something like that, and I think this is kind of what Negative wanted to allude to, is you actually become more restrictive with how map design becomes and not less restrictive. You become like, there's a common complaint from pretty much literally everybody that maps kind of look the same. They all feel the same. Like I saw Destiny was at the StarCraft Summit last year, and the first thing he asked me was, why do maps all look the same? It's like, well, everyone wants the same thing. Everyone wants the standardization, but they don't at the same time.
Yeah.
There are a surprising number of pro gamers out there who would be completely and perfectly happy with 7 reskins of Overgrowth every season.
Well, there's a Team Liquid admin that supports that idea
too.
There. That is that's funny because a lot of the statements did include little things about have solid maps first and foremost, but obviously you can't have 7 reskins. Maris, what do you think about guidelines in map making?
I kind of agree with the guys. Like, it's good to have like this very basic, what makes a playable map kind of things, just like the main sizes and having certain like jokes at the natural that need to be like this and this wide, and so that people can wall off, and bases being certain distance away from each other and all that stuff. But I think when you make more and more maps, you kind of learn to do that, and then you can know the general rules, and you can maybe start breaking some things because you can kind of play around them in certain ways, so it kind of leaves room for creativity more. So no hard rules, but those very basic things.
Cool. Yeah. Well, I think we've nailed most of the things about maps, but before we get into the questions that we have from the community, I was wondering if anyone has anything about maps that they wanted to say in this episode that I wasn't good enough to get a question to get that answer out of you. Like, I know that all of y'all prepared quite a bit for this. So is there something that I've missed here that people should know about maps, the map making community, anything like that?
Map makers hate Terran players.
But yeah,
we hate you guys so much.
If you notice, I've got a sign behind me. This is my motivation every day. This is my reason for doing what I do. Every night before I go to bed, I look at that sign.
I love Brood War?
No,
or Broodling.
Oh,
I love Broodling Infester. It's cut off.
The other one too, off to the side of my head. I go to bed. I see this sign. I'm reminded how terrible Terran is. I'm reminded that I need to punish them with my map design. I'm reminded of the time when a Terran player a long time ago, he beat me up, stole my wallet, and of how all of them need to pay for what this horrible person has done.
Doing God's work, that's for sure. All
Here,
right.
I posted in chat the Brood Lord Infestor picture. Since
There
they
you
can't
go.
see it on, oh wait, Cobra
We have it
already
now.
got it. Yeah.
Perfect.
I get the deep zoom in on it.
All right. Anything else, guys, about maps before we get into the Patreon questions?
I don't
I'd-
think so.
I'd just like to give a shout out to all of the really old school map makers around like 2010 to 2012 or so who put in the real foundations for what we have done as a community and who really weren't recognized all that much just because the infrastructure wasn't there yet. People like the Planetary Workshop guys like Leafix, Eltage, Mural, Funk Mode. Even before that, the broodwarmaps.net people who were working on foreign maps all the way from 2002 or something. Especially the ones who are still active recently, like especially Freakling, who's put in a ton of work into the brood war mapping scene, basically mapping out a whole bunch of procedures for map design, testing, etc. The others like Crystal Drag, Excalibur, Stylezerg. Some of the even some of the newer StarCraft 2 map makers who might not have seen as much success, but they've still influenced a lot of the people who are around now, like Fatam, etc. New Sunshine, Time Twister.
Zweck. I think Zweck had a pretty good influence recently.
Mm-hmm.
The king of all of them, Super Omen, maker of Cloud Kingdom.
The goat.
Yep.
The real goat.
Cool.
I would
right.
I like to add on to that
Mm-hmm.
for not StarCraft, but there is a Warcraft 3 melee map making scene as well, and they're all very talented, very kind people. If any of you are fans of Warcraft 3, I think most of them hang out on Hive Workshop, but they're all great people. So if you want to support them as well as map makers, I would recommend you do so. They have kind of a TLMC like we do as well.
All right. I think we will, from there, jump into the Patreon questions. Let's go ahead and get into it. So hopefully we have a lot of map-related questions. We'll see. First, from Uncle Vinny. And of course, guys, don't forget, if you want to ask questions and you're a Patreon member, just go to thepylonshow.com and you can submit your question. You probably have a couple minutes before we close the door. Anyways, from Uncle Vinny, I keep hearing about casters/viewers not knowing who will be casting an event up until very close to the event. What's the purpose of this? Do you like it? Well, sometimes people are not booked very quickly, and I think that there's an overall anxiety about social media from events, and they don't realize that you don't have to have the perfect graphic to announce your casters, but they all want to. So sometimes that just gets swept under the rug and it doesn't get announced forever, and it's hilarious because there's been many events all of us have flown to that people don't even know we're going to, and then it gets just silly. Thank you for the question, Uncle Vinny. All right, from Seed Zero, make your own map pool for the Brood War ladder. Something that would be fun, reasonably balanced, and not get stale. Brood War has so many maps in its history, so lots to choose from. 7 maps, 2 2-player, 2 3-player, 3 4-player. You keep any maps in that are already in the pool. Why are you not replacing them? Do your best, guys. What do you think about a map pool here?
I mean, my first instinct would be go to broodwarmaps.net, search by newest updates, and look it through all the amazing community maps which have never been played and deserve their shot at high-level competition. But out of current maps that are like the established Kespa maps, my favorite Brood War map of all time is probably Gladiator. Just think it's
my favorite.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I think it's just like a great example of like well thought out Brood War map design, where you have ridges for defender's advantage. You have the high ground thirds that are pretty much equidistant between both sets of naturals, which is something that I think a lot of Brood War maps don't really take into account that much. aside from that, it's a very solid standard archetypal layout.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I always loved the relationship of high to low ground on Gladiator. It's always kind of like, so I had to study a lot of Brood War maps when I was doing Starbow, when I was really, really new at map making. And I did look at the more wackier maps, not wacky, but like less standardized. So stuff like Blitz X was one that was like, this is kind of strange. But I always kind of went back to stuff like Heartbreak Ridge and Gladiator and really figuring out how maps were related to each other. I don't think I could ever create a map pool, but my favorite maps were always Circuit Breakers and Gladiator, and maybe Final Destination or Destination.
Playing Smash there.
Yeah. Sorry. Those are the three maps that always come to mind when I think of really, really fun maps for me to play. They're just interesting.
All right.
There's one particular map when I think of good 2-player map design. It got played a bit. As it turns out, it was a little Terran favored ultimately, but I think the overall concept was extremely solid and very representative of what 2-player Brood War maps should be, and that is Oxide by Freakling.
Oxide's a good one.
Where you have a very distinct low ground rush path, which has narrow chokes positioned along the entire way, so that larger armies are encouraged to take the longer high ground route around the edges of the map. It's more awkward, but you gain the advantage of just easier attacks. There's a lot of that same sort of layout inspired a lot of StarCraft 2 maps, like Cloud Kingdom was based around that idea. But Brood War is where it really shines just because the pathing is garbage. So yeah, I just think maps that incorporate this idea of the easier the attack path, the longer it will take you to do that attack. It's a solid design principle to adhere to.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Maris, do you have any Brood War experience with maps?
Not really, so I can't really say much about it. So.
No problem. As far as me, like I can't really make the map pool too well because the game has changed so much that a lot of the maps that I remember as being really great maps that I loved are no longer balanced, like Shin Peaks of Baekdu. That was my favorite map for years. But yeah, if you put that map out now, would it be possible for Zerg to ever win a game there? I'm not sure. It would
where would they get their gas from?
You got me, man. You just
I guess that kind of forward base, but like that's really bad.
I think you'd be going mech there and easying them. Destination is definitely one of my favorites ever. Gladiator, I definitely agree, is a very good map. I love Circuit Breakers. I actually really like that space map we have in the 3-player pool right now. For some reason, it is Power Bond.
Power Bond.
Yeah, I actually quite like that one. I'm having very interesting games there. I like how many bases there are and how attackable
this
they
map.
are. It's really cool.
You like Gladiator until you're playing TVP though, right? And then a bunch of zealots just sit on your ramp
all the time. But it's still a good map though. I still quite enjoy it. There's a lot of variety in the play there still, even though there's a few too many gateway men. Yeah, I don't know if I could lock down a solid pool. I do want to say Death to Fighting Spirit and Death to Python.
Completely agreed.
Oh, agree. I agree.
Fighting Spirit, well, first off, Python's terrible, and I think everyone's realized that at this point, but
yes.
Fighting Spirit is truly a pile of garbage, and it is not balanced in any way, and anyone who thinks it is a fool. It is... It's comfortable to play on, so people like it.
Even if it was, I think any map that's lasted for 10 years, it's had its time.
Yeah.
I always preferred Circuit over Fighting, like
Circuit Breakers that's a great map.
So much
Breakers.
better.
That's probably the best 4-player map ever created, to be honest.
I could agree with that.
Yeah.
Also, fuck Aztec. I hate that map so much.
I can
Aztec's
get on board.
another one where
garbage.
In concept, I really like it because it follows all those guidelines that I was talking about earlier. But as it turns out, it's just not a balanced map.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't care for that one. It's hard to remember really good 3-player maps. We haven't had like a ton of really good 3-player maps.
I
Maybe
can't
that's why I
think of
like
any that I
Powerball
liked.
so much right now. Well, a
Yeah.
lot of them, I look at like Rush Hour. I'm like, oh no, that would be the worst map right now. Never, ever, ever.
What was
Again, go look at Freakling's maps. He's made quite a few 3-players.
I've quite liked his 4-player maps. Like In the Way of an Eddy is. I actually quite like that map as a
What was
4-player
that,
map. It's very interesting.
what was that 3-player map from like last year? It was one of those anti-flash maps. It had
Oh,
2
Medusa?
ramps.
Oh
No. It had 2 ramps, kind of like an arm.
Oh,
Transistor. Kind of
Transistor.
centered.
Transistor.
Was it Transistor? I'm looking. Yes, Transistor. I thought that was kind of neat. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
different.
It was good in like Protoss versus Zerg and Protoss versus Protoss. I think it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And then
I thought it was
Terran
sweet.
versus Zerg, I think it was well, it was okay. Terran versus Zerg.
I
Terran versus
couldn't.
Protoss was pretty tough though.
Yeah, I could never figure out how to fight TVP when I played, but I thought it was cool.
No, it was. You all end as a Terran there.
Yeah.
Good question.
Fun
Good
fact,
question, Say0.
Transistor actually started out as a StarCraft 2 map concept
Really?
that was developed for the very first ever StarCraft 2 Pro League.
Damn.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It was eventually ported over to Brood War. The original concept didn't really work out, but half of it eventually turned into Korhal Sky Island. Not many might remember, but it was.
Oh, my brain is almost there. I remember the name of that, but can't quite remember the map.
I'll post it.
And by the way, shout out for your map, Overwatch. It's actually
Thanks.
probably the lowest win percentage I've ever had on any map, but I still enjoy it. Even in Terran versus Terran, I think
You're
I
welcome.
lose 95% of the games there. It's like crazy. I'm just not smart enough for all the ramps. Yeah. Oh my god, that map's crazy. I do vaguely remember this map though. All right, thank you, Sate0, for the very good question. I'm sorry we don't have an exact map pool for you, but I think we did all right there.
I think it's way too hard to do that.
Yeah, it takes a lot of thought to try to balance out a good map pool. Okay, from Anescu. How many pro gamers have a background in music? Snoot and Lucera spring to mind. Are there any advantages of coming from music into StarCraft apart from just good control of your hands? Now, I have no background in music, but that sounds reasonable to me. Do any of you guys have a background in music and could speak to that?
Well, Negative and I
Actually,
both
quite a
play.
lot.
Yeah.
Maris, do you have a background in music at all?
Not really.
No, me either. I'm with you here. All right.
Either with the keyboard.
Negative.
Yeah, I'm trained in piano. I've played jazz piano in some bands. I try to write electronic music. Been fiddling with software for years now, but whether it has any impact on StarCraft, I guess it's just a general desire to create things. I write music, I make maps.
I think structure and discipline as well is a big factor. Because I'm not nearly as musically experienced as Negative is, but I took music theory for quite a bit. I play guitar, play a bit of keyboard. I have a pretty center on music theory, but I would only think the transferable skill would be discipline, having a rigorous training schedule. I can't think of any other players. I knew Snoot and Lucera both were as well, but I can't think of anyone else. A lot of these people don't really talk about things outside of StarCraft publicly, so
I think
it's hard.
It's very interesting though, right? Because I mean, obviously, if you do like a musical instrument, your hands are really good, and you can you've already figured out how to practice well at something like that. And I like the idea of it a lot. I've been over the last couple of years reading a little bit about the way that like pianists train and stuff like that, because I think I'm sure there's something there, right?
I think it would be just the idea of the 10,000 hours of practice, sharing that kind of thing. If you were to do something like if you're a musician, you actually did employ that, it wouldn't be different from having a rigorous like sports training regimen for 10,000 hours. Like it's still
Mhm.
the same kind of concept. I think that's really what we're touching on. I don't think music itself would have. It's hard to say. They're very, very different things.
It doesn't. I used to be decent at piano, and I've always been trash at StarCraft.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the reasons I got into map making was because I was really bad at the game itself.
Make
Just-
everyone else bad.
Yep.
All right. Well, I quite like the idea and the question. So thank you, Inescu, for that. All right, from Sauce King, my first question. Spell Dad, I wanted to ask Artosis how you balance playing, casting, content creating, and being a good dad. For example, I'm very active in my clan and found this transition hard. I imagine it must have been twice as hard for you since playing the game has been your life. Just wondering. Well, you definitely play a lot less, but it is my job. So I carve out time, like if the kids are at school, and when they're asleep. Basically, the millisecond that my last child goes to sleep, I get on the computer and play StarCraft. And occasionally, if there's like a tournament going on, we watch VODs on the background TV while I'm making breakfast and stuff like that. So I just kind of squeeze in where I can, but because it's my job, I get to do more than most other dads, because you probably have a job that you have to go to that isn't StarCraft. Yes, thank you for the question, Sauce King, and congrats. From Nayan, what is the scariest horror movie you've ever seen?
Event Horizon. That movie
Okay.
fucked me up when I was younger. Like there's a scene where I can't remember exactly the sequence. I think it's when he like approaches the center rings and it flashes like 30 seconds of a bunch of really, really, really graphic images. And my brother and I were like, wait, what were those? And we actually went through frame by frame and looked at all of them. And one of them was like this spike going through this woman's mouth with barbed wire. And I'm just like, well, I'm not sleeping for the next week.
I haven't seen that movie, but I've watched the clip that you're talking about on YouTube. And yeah,
It's fucked.
It's pretty freaky. And I've heard the whole connection to that. Like, does this have to do with Warhammer 40K? Like, it's a fan theory going around.
I haven't heard of that. That's interesting.
It's the scariest movie you've seen, -0.
Honestly, I don't know. I don't watch a lot of movies. I don't watch a lot of horror movies. So I'll pass.
All right. Maris, have you seen any scary horror movies?
I used to watch quite a lot when I was younger, like in, I don't know, 7th grade or something like that. But I wasn't ever really scared by pretty much any of those. But I guess the only one that I can remember ever seeing and being really scared was when I was like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. The Shining game was on TV, and I just remember the hallway scenes.
Yeah.
The twins and all that stuff, how it was filmed. That was actually kind of the scariest, but like if I watched it now, I wouldn't be scared at all, but I guess I was so young, so that kind of stuck. But in general, I enjoy the psychological stuff, but I wouldn't say I'm actually scared of them. Yeah.
I don't really watch horror movies because I don't like to be scared. That's the same reason I don't watch sad movies, because I don't like to be sad and stuff like that, right? Like I like stuff with happy endings and whatnot, and I get upset if there's not, because yeah, I don't like my emotions being tampered with like that. But the scariest movie I ever saw was Gremlins, because I saw it when I was a little kid. I had nightmares.
It's a good one.
For so long. I was certain that they were like hiding in the toilet and going to get me if I went to the bathroom, and I made my mother wrap me up in a blanket like a burrito so that they couldn't get me at night and stuff like that. I had to have a nightlight. I was super duper scared as a little kid after I saw Gremlins. And then you go back and watch now and you're like, oh my God, what? Like how was anyone afraid of that?
I think some honorable mentions are like Pan's Labyrinth, like The Ring, or classics. Fourth Kind was a good one because they had this thing where they showed quote unquote real footage and then Hollywood footage next to each other. And the ending of that movie was pretty disturbing. Had this kind of exorcist moment. Person started floating in a bed, head cracked into 180, and started speaking Sumerian. You're just like, the hell?
That stuff's creepy.
No, now that I think about it, there was a series that was happening last year. It's not exactly a movie, but it was a series called the GSL. I don't know if you've seen it, but a Terran player won 3 times. It's horrifying.
That would be scary.
I couldn't believe it.
Dude,
based on your history.
There was a spin-off of that series where this Finnish guy like just killed a bunch of people in this like foreign thing. It was really really scary.
Yeah, no, I once had this fever dream that I moved to Korea for StarCraft because they were the best at it, and then they weren't anymore, and some Finnish guy was winning it. So,
but Team Liquid disagrees.
Oh, do they now?
Yeah, no such thing as the gap closing, right?
Well, thank you for the question, Nayan. All right, move to the next one. Paragleber asks, and you always have the skateboard visible in the background. That's because that's where I put it. How often do you skate? Can you do an ollie and a kickflip? If yes, you should make a video for us to show off your skills. While we were at it, which skateboarding video games have you guys all played, and which ones are your favorite? All right, so yeah, I don't skate too often. Basically, when I bring my kids outside for the express purpose of like riding things, we have like some areas where I bring them to ride bikes or scooters or whatever, and I bring my skateboard and I putt around. Occasionally, I'll ride it down to buy a burrito or something, whatever. I'm not any good. I used to rollerblade like aggressively on ramps and rails and stuff when I was younger, but I am no. I putter around and it's fun, and so I like it. Which skateboarding video games have you all played, and which were your favorites? Tell me you guys played Skate or Die. That was the greatest. The GOAT.
That's a good game.
Yeah.
That's my brother used to have a lot of older systems, so I got to play games like that. Everyone's probably gonna say Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. I was always a big fan of the Skate series. Skate 2 and 3 were pretty fun, especially when you learn to break the game. I don't know if any of you know this, but there used to be a YouTuber named Felix or Helix Snake, and he actively spent years breaking Skate to like have ragdoll physics completely freak out. He would fling himself across the map. It was super fun to break that game. That's all I got though.
Play any skating games, Maris?
Nope. Never played any.
That's fine.
Too busy.
I don't know.
We need to have a wine question in here. That's what we need.
Ah.
I don't mean Terran wine either.
-0. Any skating games?
Nope.
Well, I like Skate or Die and 1 or 2 of the Tony Hawks. I played. Here's just a funny side thing about my weird personality. I forget which Tony Hawk game it was that I played a lot, but I chose as my main guy Rune Guilford because he had the highest top speed but poor control, and I figured I could make up for poor control with my skill, but not for top speed. All right.
You should play Skate. I think you'd like him.
Yeah.
You'd probably like it.
Maybe. Skateboarding games are always fun. All right. From our very own Alessandro again. Thank you for the year of service to the Pylon Show. If a sentient map was shaped like a pizza, what kind of cheese would it ask for?
I think that if a map was sentient, it would probably be Protoss. So I guess it's kind of self-explanatory what kind of cheese it would like.
All right.
We have a audio video clip provided by John the Memer on Twitter.
God.
All right.
Pylon cannon spot.
Shattered.
0 pylon cannon spots.
It's just the cannon and naturally walled off. You could actually do that. Pizza time.
Thank you, John.
Oh my God.
Wow.
This was
Someone put a lot of
That's
effort into this.
John really is really good at making these things. Pizza time.
Well, you sold me with the guinea pigs behind the pizza.
I would know that the map would not have pineapples on it.
Pineapples are a wonderful topping for pizza, and
Agreed.
corn especially.
Is it corn?
Okay, I'm
Corn,
gonna have to
yeah.
disagree with you there.
You guys have never been to Korea, I take it, because
love to be.
corn is on the pizza over here. And
I think
it's
I've
delicious.
actually
I could see
gotten
why
corn
it
on
works.
pizza.
Makes it a little bit sweet.
How do they prepare the corn? Is it just straight?
It's under the cheese. Mm.
Oh,
Wait, what?
well, that sounds kind of interesting.
Yeah, it gives you a little bit of extra texture, a little bit of
But
extra
yeah,
taste.
crunch.
Yeah,
Have you-
a little bit.
Have you ever tried chocolate on pizza?
No, I can't say.
Like, is it like melted chocolate layer or like individual, like chocolate chip kind of thing?
Either.
They both sound
actually
good.
pretty nice. I tried them when I was younger.
I did have a straight up chocolate pizza, but that was like a dessert pizza. It wasn't pizza with chocolate on it, really. All right.
Huh.
Thank you, Alessander, for the interesting question. Ryan Yui asks, at the end of 2018, there were posts online about how WCS wouldn't be renewed for 2019 and that Blizzard would be pulling support from SC2. Would you guys happen to know how is SC2 looking financially for Blizzard and player base, and how is the competitive scene of SC2 looking for 2020?
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I don't know. I'm just a
Like,
dude who sits in the corner staring at the editor all day.
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Truthfully, none of us know this.
like it's your guys' responsibility and ours to like play the game, to consume its content, to share content creators if they're new or old. Like it's all a community effort, every single aspect of it, you know. Go watch Wardy, go watch Fear Dragon, also go watch like Cole Terran when he streams not as WCS. Talk about everything. Like it's a meme, but like every time Artosis and Taste would say share that GeoCell is going on, like they mean it. Like,
yeah,
as long
absolutely.
as we keep doing things together, we'll be fine, and you don't have to worry about doom and gloom all the time.
Yeah, and I think as far as competitive scene goes, it's looking pretty good. Korea's about the same, and everywhere else seems to be continually improving. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to 2020.
I think the only thing that has genuine concern is like military. I think like 4 people are going to military, especially Protoss players next year. That's like a legitimate concern, but like, what can you do?
Yeah, it's true. Doesn't really have anything to do with the funding or anything.
Pretty sure Beyond comes back next year, right? Or end of this year? One of those two. I don't remember when he left anymore. There should be a couple people come back. Is it 1 year or 2 year?
It's a little bit under 2 years right now for military service.
I think it's been.
And it matters where you get stationed too. It can vary. There are some people that get stationed for over 2 years with a different type of job, but
okay.
Yeah.
Heads up that we have 2 minutes before the Q&A closes.
Okay.
So to sum it up, it's a dead game, just like it was last year and the year before and the year before that and the year before that and the year before
all
that.
the way back to 2001, just to make this completely clear, because I've been there the whole time, and that's when people started telling me that Brood War was dead was in 2001. So, yeah. All right. Thank you for the question, Ryan Yu. World is Doom asks, are there any new or different concepts that you've been trying out in lately when making maps? So new or different concepts that you guys are trying that we might not have seen yet, might not have heard of yet.
I've got a couple of neutral egg maps. That's really it.
What does that mean exactly?
It's like the Brood War ones. So if you haven't played Brood War, basically, so like you have a mineral wall, you can't move through it, you can only mine it. Eggs would be a unit that workers could pass through if you mineral walked. So if you have 2 mineral patches opposite to each other, an egg and then a solid wall, if you clicked on a mineral patch, the worker would pass through. A unit otherwise would not be able to unless it's killed. But eggs have really high armor values, so have fun clearing those. So I have a couple maps where it's a secondary natural entrance with a large rack of eggs, so splash damage would hit them hard, but like Zerglings wouldn't really be able to like abuse their way through. That's all I got.
Cool. Maris, do you have any new experimental stuff you're trying out with maps right now?
not in like normal melee stuff, but like free for all maps. I've been making a few of those lately, so I've used some trigger stuff in those. So there's like neutral hostile units spawning from like the middle of the map and walking towards the spawning points and stuff like that, but not really in like 1v1 or anything like that.
Negative Zero, how about you? Anything new?
I used to quite a bit, but honestly, at this point, like, I just wait to see what the TLMC categories are and tailor what I make towards those.
Makes sense. Cool. Good question there, World is Zoom. Thank you much. Ayamura asks, what is one map element or idea that you think would be great for the game that Blizzard does not currently allow in its maps?
Eggs.
Okay.
Mineral fields that are higher than the standard 1500.
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That's
yeah,
cool.
they don't.
I like the idea
don't let
of
us do
having
it.
a base that has a comparatively low mining rate. Like, it only has maybe like 4 or 6 mineral fields, but each one has the amount raised up, so the total resource count is still higher, around the same.
Yeah,
So it's a full base, but just lowered mining rate.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Maris, do you have anything that you would like for them to allow?
I guess the what we talked about earlier, the bridge stuff could be interesting, but yeah, the mineral and the neutral egg kind of thing would be also kind of interesting to play around.
Cool.
I'd like to mention that regarding what I said, we are allowed to use mineral patches that are lower than the standard values, but not higher for some reason. Because I think Blizzard was afraid that we'd try to create like our own economic system, essentially.
Yeah.
Of the map makers as a whole.
I could see
and they
that.
just kind of crack down on that.
Especially because that's like one of the big changes with the workers, right? Is changing the mineral patch values to kind of make the game flow a bit differently. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, thank you, Ayamura. Zesty asks, in honor of Jeff, I'd like to propose a fundraiser to the map makers to design a map that incorporates some subtle phallic symbols.
Oh, we already do.
Well,
whoever pulls this
You're just not looking hard enough.
You know, Winter's Gate has those. Actually,
there's a couple of them on a lot of maps. Hell, Negative had a map in the last that comes with 69 in it, and none of us noticed until the last second.
Wow!
Go look it up. It's called
obvious, though.
It's called Biosphere. Let's look up the last TLMC thread.
I'll link it.
But yeah, it's
well,
it's got a giant 69 in desert written right down the middle. It actually works really tactically well for the pathways. It wasn't intentional at first, but once I saw it, I was like, I am embracing this wholeheartedly.
I love that you guys are coming out with these things, because it says, the second part of this, whoever pulls this off and gets it added to the Blizzard map pool without them noticing, then revealing their success will go down in infamy for all time.
Hey, it made it through TLMC at least.
Yeah.
It got close. It's actually a pretty good map in my opinion too. So
one day, perhaps.
One day.
That's excellent. Thank you, Zesty. From GGE Mini 19. If you each could rework how maps get added into the ladder, or how they get tested and iterated on, what would you do? You have free reign to implement any system you want to allow map makers to have the easiest possible avenue for your maps to be used. How would you change up the world for the map makers?
I'll let everyone else go first.
All right. Maris, how about we start with you? What do you think? What would you change here?
It's a difficult question.
Yes, it's a big one.
Yeah. But one thing that I was actually thinking about sometime like this week was when people complain how many maps there are, even when in the finalist, like the 16 maps, and how like they don't have time to test them and all that. Maybe if, let's say, there was 4 pro Terran players and they divided the 16 maps between them, so there's like 4 maps that each of them would test, and same for all the other races, and they look for the you know, they are looking for the same stuff basically, but they're liking maps pretty much. So maybe that would kind of be easier for them to test the maps and stuff like that. But I don't know about the rest. Yeah, maybe there could be some place where it's easier to give feedback, you know, like a separate site, or also maybe in game when TLMC starts, maybe there could be better, you know, advertisement, you know. Right now, usually it's during the tournament.
It's usually right before the voting.
Yeah, so maybe it should like start advertising right when the contest is, you know, announced, and then when the finalists are announced, there could be start like that.
I think they do a launcher post when the contest goes live. But I think that's the links that they go to.
Yeah, maybe there could be like when you open the game, there could be like site thingy or something. I don't know, just a bit more visibility, and you know, something like that.
Good ideas. -0, how about you? What do you think?
I think that question right there is it's a huge one, too big to think of a proper, thought out, strategical system as a whole. But I will say, if there's one period of time that we really need pro gamers' feedback, one time for them to focus on actually going in, looking at the maps, talking about them, telling us what they think, it is in the revision period during the TLMC, between the time when the top 16 is chosen and between the
it's right when the tournament starts, basically.
Yeah, when the tournament starts and when we have chances to make changes to our finalists before we have to submit the final revision, and then the final 5 are chosen. That's the one time when we know, okay, you can focus all of your attention onto these particular 16 maps right now, because of these, probably 7 of them are going to get onto the ladder. That's not so, like, a few of them are going to be wasted, might be wasting your time a little tiny bit, but if you want to influence at all how the ladder pool is created, then that's the chance. That's it right there.
Cool. Avex.
So I have thought quite a bit about this because I'm pretty involved with the back side of the scene. So I'm going to post in the Zoom chat. I've considered changing the structure of TLMC slightly to where when directly after the voting ends, so the top 5 is decided, the week after that, I would like Blizzard to converse with themselves to decide what maps they think they want to be added, probably around 7 maps, because they usually don't add all 7, they add like 3 or 4. So they want to say to the public that these are the maps that they think will make it to ladder, or they are considering. That way, because the most common complaint I've seen from pros is that they don't want to waste that time if they don't know what maps are going on. So if Blizzard comes out and says, we know we want these maps to come out, you know, it's removing another excuse, right, for anybody to not test anything. There are other things I've been pretty hard on with the admin guys for TLA, like changing how categories are structured. I don't like really the challenge category. Again, I would like to move toward every feature being always available. I don't like shoehorning things like that. I would prefer categories be by size, and then like small, medium, large, and then experimental versus standard. So that way it's pretty easy to kind of dictate pools that way. Because like currently standard and macro are really finely lined between each other. They both kind of achieve the same thing, but one's probably a bit more favored to like turtle or late gameplay. But as we've seen in the past, standard does produce that games anyway. Like year 0, for example, had a lot of really late games because of how I structured that map, but it was standard, not macro. So I would structure that completely differently. I probably wouldn't have 16 maps personally. I'd probably do like 12. I think 16 is a little too much, but there was a previous issue with TLMCs prior to this one. I'd had a huge problem with judge picking. Before it was not actually a judge pick, it was just basically runner-ups to categories. And I came into that and I'm just like, that's stupid. That's not how judges picks works. So let's not do that. And we finally changed that for this TLMC. Stuff like that would be what I would change.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, I completely agree on the distinction between standard and macro, which as it exists really isn't there. There are frequently maps in the standard category which are larger and have more bases than the macro category. And it's all ultimately just up to the discretion of the map maker where to put those. Sometimes people just make a bunch of maps and just think, oh, well, I have this certain number of slots, so I'm just going to figure out how to get the most of them in possible, even though they might not line up perfectly.
Yeah, I don't like that system either, where like I feel like anyone should be able to submit any sort of maps to whatever categories that they want. I don't like this 2-2-2 thing that we have.
Okay. Thank you much, E-Mini. Great discussion there, guys. Go on to the next question. NeosteelEnthusiast asks, some question. Best and worst maps of all time, not including your own.
Tucson Station best map.
Best map or worst map?
I'm kidding.
Best, of course.
I was appealing to Fear Dragon for a second.
Yeah. Gave us great games. It gave us great games.
I always loved Ganymede by Cantuva. That was like, I love that map. No one ever saw it, but one of my favorite maps.
Okay. What's the worst map of all time, though?
Daedalus Point.
Yeah, okay.
2 Nexus Wall.
Yeah.
Or Nexus Wall.
Yeah.
That was a pretty bad map. -0. Best and worst maps of all time?
Oh, God. I should have known this question was coming. Didn't prepare. Worst. It's kind of a cop-out because people didn't know about map making at all at the time, but just one of the early Blizzard Wings of Liberty maps, like Incineration Zone, Slag Pits.
Yeah.
I just remembered one.
Coolest Ravine, Jungle Basin.
It's going to be what I was going to say.
It's like you have a cliff over every base. There's like 20 watchtowers. Yeah.
Real. How about a biome? 5-player map. 1 TLMC once.
Yeah.
This is very good.
Best map ever, -0?
Best map. Cloud Kingdom.
Oh my God.
Cool. Maris, best and worst maps.
I think there are several like those old Blizzard maps that are kind of terrible. So any of those probably. Best. Well, there are several ones. Recent, maybe Abyssal or Catalyst, I like the most. A little older ones like Cloud Kingdom, Ohana, probably people like it a lot. Yeah.
All right.
Some of those.
Yeah. Okay, and for me, I don't know. There's a lot of maps that I really liked. Neon Violet Square, I personally had lots of fun playing on.
That one grew on a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the
I didn't
only
think I was
map
going to like it.
Oh, go ahead.
When I first saw it, I was like, I don't know about this. But when I played that map quite a bit and ended up really liking it by the end. It gave very interesting games, I felt.
That was the only map that actually really used the new category to anything. The hardest part about when that was a thing before we did these challenges was we were still within the restriction of custom. We couldn't make custom things. Like I wouldn't have been able to use eggs for that, for example. So RQM, the author of Neon Violet Square, was pretty crafty making these blocks by using pathing and doodads in a certain way.
All right. Thank you for that question, NeosteelEnthusiast. From Red Gunner Guy. Hello, map makers. Couple of questions. How often do you get input from the pros when map making? And how do you react to the endless complaints after each map pool is released? Lastly, thoughts on Abyssal Reef. Yes, this is the rock I'm going to drown on. Good luck, Mr. Artosis, keeping the pylon powered. All right. So it's 3 questions from Red Gunner guy. How often you get input from the pros? How do you react to the endless complaints after map pools are released? And Abyssal Reef. What about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please start us off, Maris.
Well, there really isn't that much feedback we get ever, unless we really start bothering them about it. So there's that. The complaints. There was this meme picture thing in the Discord.
Are you thinking of the euthermal one?
No, that Game of Thrones.
Oh, the Game of Thrones one. That's I'll find it. That's a really good one.
It's amazing. Very accurate depiction of the whole process of maps getting to ladder and all the complaints we get. So.
Got it.
I got it. I sent it already.
Yeah.
It's a little big though. You might have to zoom in quite a bit. You know what? The funniest part about this image that everyone's gonna see is, I guess someone sent it to Blizzard, and I had someone from Blizzard send me that image back. It's like, did you see this? I was like, oh my god, why did you see this? Like,
oh my god, this is actually great.
Yeah.
Here, I'll send it to you.
I got him already.
I don't know how we can show this on the Pylon show.
Yeah, I don't know how you'll be able to. But
I'll link it in the chat.
Yeah,
for everyone.
chat
It's
too.
You'll have to just like start at the top and scroll down.
It's fantastic.
Okay, I got it.
This is amazing.
It's great.
I love how special is the Night King.
The Night King, yeah.
Oh, this is great. Wow. Wow. I am impressed.
We had a good
you guys got some memers in there.
Oh yeah. They're rare, but when we make them, they're really freaking funny. I'm pretty sure music made this. Music's great.
It's so good.
I love the ladder. The dragon just comes in.
I like how it's just the darkness for feedback the entire time. That's so good. And then week 3, everyone's civil again. It's like, yeah, okay, we figured it out. My God.
Yeah.
Oh,
Everyone
man.
goes back to forgetting that maps exist, and
It's really good.
Yeah.
That's the other funny thing too, is like, I remember when Dreamcatcher came out, and
oh yeah,
I don't want to single out Euthermal because Euthermal was funny, but he posted a tweet where he's just like literally XXXDDDDD, like worst map he's ever seen, and then ended up being like cumulative 6% positive for Terran by the end of the pool. So people are a little extreme with their views on maps sometimes. I don't think this map pool is nearly as bad as everyone thinks it is, but what do I know? I'm a Bronze League map maker.
also I guess part of it is that 5-minute maps got added. So much, kind of get used to all the maps.
Yeah, that's not
kind
our
of
fault.
might play a part as well. People complaining a bit more.
And the last part of this question, thoughts on Abyssal Reef? That's been kind of this ongoing thing where we're trying to figure out if it's the best map of all time.
I thought it was a
first time.
I thought it was a good map. Definitely very solid, but I thought it was a little too turtley for my own standards.
I think grabbing 4 bases.
The downside of having 3 choices of a third is that you now have 5 bases. They're all really close to each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, I thought the map was a little too big on the sides, had a little bit too much wasted space. That's another thing I didn't touch on like my philosophy. I don't like wasted space. I try to use as much of the bounds as possible. And Abyssal Sidian has a different philosophy, so he definitely likes more kind of waviness in his layouts. You can see that in King's Cove as well, a lot more open space to use. My least favorite part of Abyssal was that fucking tank spot. I hated TVT on that map. There was a tank spot kind of side behind the natural, and I wanted to die anytime I saw it.
Oh, where you could hit some of the base and you had to go through like a one force field choke in order to defend.
Because at that point you wouldn't have broken those rocks.
Yeah.
In TVT, like you have like a couple tanks of Raven. Maybe you're finishing your first Viking, but like they probably went Viking first, and you're just like, fuck. That's old Raven too, I'm pretty sure. That's not even current Raven.
Yeah. Oh, I never went through the questions. So let's see. Feedback, not nearly enough. Complaints on Twitter, hilarious. I welcome the salt. Bring it on. We're laughing at you in Discord.
Everyone's laughing at everybody.
We all have a good time, don't we?
That's about it.
All right. Excellent. So I think that about does it. That's our questions. It has now been brought to my attention. I missed some of the Patreon essays, the VIP ones. Sorry, because I just took over the Patreon thing since Jeff's passing. So I will take care of those questions all next week. We've gone, or those statements and whatnot. They're normally stories, but yeah, we'll go over those next week. So sorry for everyone that we missed those on. We'll get to those. But the show has gone quite long at this point. It's been a fantastic show. I want to thank our sponsors just real quick before we close out. AFKT.com. Check them out. Get their T. Use Pylon as your discount code. They're great. Also, we have Matcherino, and that's matcherino.com/The Pylon Show. You can use Dadtosis as the code this week if you want to just create money out of thin air and give it to us. That's a great way to do it. Of course, you can support us on Matcherino in all sorts of ways. Also, the best way is our Patreon. That's how we get all these questions and whatnot. And look at that, you typing that right in the first time. You're so good, Matt. Patreon, of course, patreon.com/The Pylon Show. This is how we get to do this show. We really appreciate you guys for all your support. And of course, we have so many wonderful donors there. If you want to ask questions and stuff, definitely check that out. Of course, thepylonshow.com. That's our website. You can check out all the VODs and everything like that. And of course, a big thanks to the whole Pylon Show staff. Everyone works really hard, and it's Alessandra's 1 year. Yay! She makes our show notes, which we skipped that this week. Sorry about that. But we will be showing it in a slideshow format right after we're done here and getting back into it regularly next week. So big thanks to her for putting those together. If you want to know about This Week in StarCraft, of course, the links to the show notes are everywhere that you get the podcast. And all right. So that does it for the show. I want to thank all three of you for coming on. This exceeded my expectations. I feel like I have learned so much about map making and what goes into all this and the types of considerations and what you guys have done and go through and work on. So I just want you guys to let people know where they can find you, support you, watch you, any final words you have for them and everything. Negative Zero, why don't we start with you?
All right. Thought I'd start with saying just I like messing with the people who are salty about maps, but when it comes down to it, I really do want people to give their honest feedback. And any chance you get, just message one of us. I think we'd be happy to take what you have to say into account and use that to influence future map making decisions. Yeah. If you want to find me on Twitter, that's my handle right there. It's on the screen. It's really stupid. It's Negative Zero put through a Rot13 cipher, but just search Negative Zero. It should probably show up if you're following StarCraft people.
I'll retweet his username if you follow me too. So it's hard to find him. Sometimes it is.
So
Do you
yeah,
do any
that's,
streaming or anything like that that you want people to check out?
no, I don't. I don't like showing my face. This is the first time that literally anyone in the StarCraft community has seen it.
That's
So
true. All right. Very cool.
oh
Avex,
wait,
how
was I
about you?
supposed to?
Oh,
No, I was just gonna make a joke about plugging my SoundCloud, but I'm not gonna do that.
yes, you're totally allowed to if you have a SoundCloud. All right. So Avex, why don't you tell us where can people find more of you?
So I think most people here know who I am at this point, and you probably don't want to see any more of me. So block me on Twitter like every other Terran Pro has. I post pretty regularly there. I'm starting to stream again. I just moved recently. Streaming, I will be starting a YouTube series to make maps if you are interested. I'm actually going to do it this time. I'm in the comfort of my own room. I don't have background noise, so I can actually make content for once. I do have a map Discord that I help run if you were interested, as well as talking to the other map makers. I will be posting that on my Twitter as well. If you did want a direct link to that, I'd be happy to help you with that. One last thing that's not relating to me, due to how Twitch handles legacy profiles, I would recommend subbing to In Control if you haven't already, because if once that channel enters legacy mode, if you are subbed, you will keep those emotes forever and ever and ever.
That's
So,
correct. That's
and
happening shortly.
all that money, I'm pretty sure is still going to the Bulldog charity, correct?
It's being split up between covering final costs, and then the rest of it's going
Okay.
to charity, Bulldog charity. Correct? Yes.
So that's all that's important to me. I do know there's also a community member named Seraph6 who holds some of those In Control Love pins. He will be at BlizzCon if you wanted to try and get one for yourself. There's only a select few.
Also, shout out to Chicken Man, who has started that initiative and is going to be bringing some more as well.
Oh, cool. Good on him. That's all. I don't want to make this about me. So,
Maris, where can people find you?
Twitter. I don't stream or anything, so there. And if you come to the Discord, I'll be there memeing. And I post maps and like when I finish them, completed ones on Twitter, and sometimes some art stuff as well, and occasional bunny pictures. So yeah, Twitter.
Great.
ooh,
All right.
sorry, can I do one more thing?
Yeah,
I forgot something.
Please, go ahead.
Since we're talking about feedback today, I did post a screenshot that Music, another map maker, drafted up a couple days ago. An idea of a website where map makers can post their work and then community members can kind of share their thoughts. It's kind of like Brood War maps for StarCraft 2, have like a rating system. It'll tell everybody if you've actually playtested that map, for example. I would love your thoughts on that. If you could go to my Twitter, I do believe it's still one of my most recent posts. Do give feedback, because that is something we are seriously considering doing it. I'll retweet it so it's the very front of my my feed. That's something that would be really useful. It'd be beneficial for literally everybody. We're even thinking of having like pinned pro comments. It'd be really good for everybody.
Gotta scroll through all the classic WoW comments first.
Sorry, I just retweeted it, so it should be at the top now.
Yeah, we got it.
We're having a lot of fun with classic.
I will note that Team Liquid itself does have a custom apps forum, but not many people were using it, so it's kind of died off over the years. Most of us just talk about maps on our own, like personal map making Discord. But if there was the desire for it, we could potentially just use that.
Yeah, it's just an alternative idea.
All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. This has been, again, a wonderful show. I hope that everyone has enjoyed it and learning about maps, a little bit different from regular Pylon shows, but I think in its own way, one of our most awesome episodes. Again, thanks to the whole Pylon crew and all of the supporters out there. don't forget, this weekend we got GSL Code S as well as the ASL Finals on Sunday. It is Flash's last series before the military, as far as like a professional pro series. So
Oh, damn.
we'll see if he can win that last championship. His 4th ASL he's going for. So that's
Let's
going to be
be
great.
real.
Make sure you tune in there. Yeah, I think so. But we'll see. So that is it. Thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you again next week at the normal time and place.
Thanks.
Unless the baby happens.
Yeah.